Chapter 164. Sunrise. Chapter 164. Sunrise. There was clearly only a little distance between them. Xiao Qie watched Shen Zichuan attentively, his gaze sliding from his brow to his lips, as he said in a hoarse voice, "Oh, how I love you so!" Shen Zichuan felt a shiver rise through him. That was a tremble of defeat. He was like the captured knight in the dim light, a pervading darkness that would still entwine Xiao Qie. The grip on him was too tight, so much so that all that lay in his eyes was fully bared to Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie inched closer in a confrontation that was almost a kiss. He murmured, maliciously and wickedly, "I love you so much." Shen Zichuan felt like he was about to be driven astray by Xiao Qie's words. This line ended him over and over again. He could not keep up an ounce of pretense, and what remained of Shen Zichuan lay fully exposed before Xiao Qie. This was a side of him that Shen Zichuan himself could not bring himself to face. All that had to do with hypocrisy, deceit, and hostility was swept up into the tidal waves of desire. Shen Zichuan was panting. The word love signified holding nothing back. Xiao Qie made Shen Zichuan's eyes wet. That feeling of being filled surged through Shen Zichuan's body while he was pressed against the edge of the table, causing him to cry out softly as he clung on to Xiao Qie's warmth without reservations. Xiao Qie restrained both of Shen Zichuan's wrists. Leading up from the curve of his waist was a crescent moon. He seized on the opportunity his height afforded him to press against this lustrous smoothness, thrusting in and out with overwhelming force. It was as though he wanted to nail the words, "I love you so much," into Shen Zichuan's body, and then brand it deep into his bones and blood. The jade earring was polished until it gleamed with a watery shine. There were still the sounds of the patrol squad on their rounds outside the military tent, of someone chatting a short distance away, and of the soughing of the wind as it roamed. But all of that belonged to another universe. None of them belonged to Shen Zichuan. He could only hear the table being bumped out of place, the climax of their union, and Xiao Qie's heartbeat. Every single thrust spelled, "I love you so much." This was too much to bear for Shen Zichuan. He was about to come undone, be it his voice or another part of him. He trembled, unable to stand firm on his feet, and as his cries unraveled, he extended a finger on his restrained hands to hook it on the hem of Xiao Qie's clothes. This one hook melted Xiao Qie's heart into a puddle of mush. Xiao Qie kissed Shen Zichuan on his nape, as though he was holding him in his mouth. He was clearly so fierce, and yet he was also this tender. Shen Zichuan leaned back against Xiao Qie, intimately joined in unison from the cavity of their chests to every single part of them. A beautiful line extended from the small of his back, accentuating it. Xiao Qie undid the restraints, but Shen Zichuan gave up reaching for the edge of the table. Nothing in this world could be relied on, nothing except Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie murmured something into Shen Zichuan's ear. It was as if he was egging him on, and at the same time showering him with praises. Shen Zichuan was the jade. Xiao Qie kissed him. Water droplets fell from the corners of Shen Zichuan's eyes. He closed his eyes, damp with tears, and with all the self-restraint he could muster, he called out in a soft, trembling voice, "Yi." Xiao Qie buried his face in the side of Shen Zichuan's neck. He was intoxicated, taunted all day by this evil man who called his name as he pleased, his every word an invitation. He dawdled, as if he had woken up from a nap, and naturally responded, Suen. Shen Zichuan turned his head to face Xiao Qie, their breaths intertwining. In a show of near innocence, he called out like a toddler learning to speak, "Oh, how I love you so!" Xiao Qie lost his hold on Shen Zichuan's waist. His mouth was parched as he pulled out with difficulty. He quickly picked his Lanzhou off the ground and took a few steps to the edge of the couch, where he turned him over. Xiao Qie pulled up Shen Zichuan's hands and kissed him deeply. They had to do it face to face, so that they could take in all the worst and the best of each other's expressions into their eyes. Xiao Qie pushed aside Shen Zichuan's damp hair. Even their imperfections were congruent with one another. All that was abominable, eccentric, and even ruthless of them could leave no chasm between them. They entangled intimately in secret, indulging to their heart's content, sweating in never-ending torrents amidst the howling winds on the battlefield. At the third quarter of the hour of Mao, Shao Chia carried Sun Sichuan on his back and made his way to the frost-covered grasslands. "It's taking so long." Sun Sichuan gathered the fur collar around him and buried himself into Shao Chia's back. He said in a muffled voice, "Start running." "Exhausting me to death?" Shao Chia jolted him once. Sun Sichuan grasped the little braid concealed under Shao Chia's collar with his fingers and said, "I'm already exhausted to death." The day was still early, and the eastern mountain ranges blocked some of the views in their field of visions. Both men were covered under the same cloak under the strong wind. Before the day broke, they had already walked out of Shai camp. There was a small watchtower to the north that had already fallen into disuse, and it was here that Shao Chia was heading to. Both men huddled under the cloak together and sat atop the old watchtower, facing the east as they waited for sunrise. "I thought you came to propose marriage." Shao Chia moved Sun Sichuan's inclined head onto his own shoulder. "I'm getting old from all this waiting." Sun Sichuan was sensitive to the cold, and the wind was strong. He stretched out half a finger to lift up the overcoat and burrowed his way inside, wanting so much to bury all of himself into Shao Chia's bosom to seek refuge from the wind. "I'll come again when you're 80, Sun Sichuan said. "By then, your father won't be able to hack me." Shao Chia planted his chin on top of Sun Sichuan's head with the overcoat between them. "At the very least, you're the prefectural lord, so you still ought to possess the audacity to elope." He thought about it, then continued, "The old man does admire you so." Was the reason Sun Sichuan wanted a light cavalry of assassins truly to place them along the Chaosha River? A squad like that required inhuman self-restraint, because they were simply too good to utilize. How long of a preparation time would Sun Sichuan need to put together such a squad? If he went to all the efforts and succeeded, the problem would bring them back to square one. Could this squad continue to be placed along the Chaosha River? Did Sun Sichuan truly only want to deploy them along the Chaosha River? This was a blade that would kill without restraint. It had a darkness that mirrored another side of Sun Sichuan. If he did not have Shao Chia. Shao Chia pulled the cloak down a little to reveal Sun Sichuan and said, "Here it comes." With his eyes peeking out, Sun Sichuan looked towards the east. Shao Chia lifted him directly by the chin. Thick clouds rolled on the horizon, while the wind ran rampant amidst the dim world. Shortly afterward, golden rays of light broke through the gaps, like countless arrows of light piercing through the layers of clouds. The sun, which seemed to bear the load of immense weight, launched out from the waves of clouds, pulverizing the floating clouds into foam as it rose magnificently in all its majesty. The vast expanse of grasslands was instantaneously illuminated, igniting the thin frost such that they sparkled as they paved the earth. Withered grass roared to life, its billowy surge in the wind clear and distinct to the ears. "Shao Sun!" Sun Sichuan inexplicably called out. Shao Chia poked him in the cheek. Sun Sichuan grabbed hold of his finger, revealing the redness between his wrists. He seemed to be considering something. Golden waves of brilliant rays rippled out of the sky, and in no time, blue spread out like ink on a piece of rice paper, one to paint the entire canvas of sky over their head. The vast white snow-capped peaks of Hongyan Mountains stood against the summit of the clouds, where falcons cried out as they hovered. A golden hue washed over Sun Sichuan and Shao Chia in the wind. The deluge of wind was so swift that Sun Sichuan had the illusion he was about to be blown away. But Shao Chia was like a steady rock shielding him from the back as he gradually moved to grasp his hands in return. "You can do as your heart desires," Shao Chia whispered into his ear. "With me here, you will never fall." Chapter 165. Shuang Yi. Chapter 165. Shuang Yi Shao Chia gave the horse that Lu Yizhi left behind to Shen Zichuan and accompanied Shen Zichuan horse riding on the grasslands of the war zone while he still had time to spare. This horse was snow-white all over, with only a small patch of black on its chest. It was both pretty and intelligent, and even more lively than Lang Tao Shuijin. There was no war going on today. Xiao Fengshu sat on top of the railing in his armor, and watched as Shen Zichuan made rounds on his horse. He said to Zhuo Qianqiu, This habit? Zhuo Qianqiu squinted his eyes against the sunlight to look at the prescription in his hand. Complete your sentence, man. Is like A Yi's mother. Xiao Fengshu stretched out a finger and traced Shen Zichuan's trajectory twice. Can't ride straight. He stays in Kudu all year round and isn't adept at horsemanship. Just let A Yi take him out riding more often in the future. Zhuo Qianqiu raised his head. Have you found eating? The venerable master is an elusive one. His comings and goings are unpredictable. He's not easy to track down. Xiao Fengshu was still holding his helmet in his hand as he brushed the dust off it. Why? Zhuo Qianqiu said gravely, We have to get eating to take a look at this child's illness. I saw him in Kudu last year. Although he appeared weak and frail outwardly, there was no major, internal damage. But looking at him now, he's already showing clear signs of deterioration. Xiao Fengshu sized Shen Zichuan up. That's serious? You have to pay the price twofold for consuming the medicine this long. Zhuo Qianqiu said. He successively suffered misfortunes thrice in Kudu, and what happened with Qi Huilian was a heavy blow to him. The good thing is that A Yi and Ji Gang are both paying attention. Can he be treated? Xiao Fengshu withdrew his gaze and looked at Zhuo Qianqiu. With a slight frown on his face, Zhuo Qianqiu folded up the prescription and returned it to his bosom. I think it's tough. Let's get him nursed back to health first. Shen Zichuan's table had an extra bowl of fresh milk during mealtime in the afternoon. He did not understand the distribution of supplies on the battleground, so he merely thought that it was on Xiao Qia's instruction. But later, when Xiao Qia entered, he brought with him another bowl of fresh milk for Shen Zichuan to drink his fill. Xiao Qia said nothing as he ate his meal, believing the milk to be from Zhuo Qianqiu. Just as he was about to go thank his Shifu, he bumped into Chen Yang, who had come to collect the bowl. Is it Shifu's? Xiao Qia nimbly put on his outer robe. I'll send it back to him. Chen Yang set the bowl in the tray and said in a hushed tone, It's our lordship's. Xiao Qia's movements slowed. His lordship instructed Wu Ziyu in the morning to give his own portion to the young master. He even got the Bianbua camp to send milk-producing cows and sheep to Tsizhou. Chen Yang picked up the tray. Then he made a special point of telling us not to make it public or tell master about it. This old man. Xiao Qia nodded. Give mine to my father tomorrow morning to make up for it. After a moment's hesitation, he called out to Chen Yang just before the latter was about to leave the tent. Forget it. I understand. Shen Zichuan could not stay for long in the war zone. The weather in the Hongyan Mountains underwent an abrupt turn, and he had to return after staying for 2 days. Heavy fog descended on them on the day of departure, and the humid wind in the eastern mountain range blew so hard it sent the military banners flapping. Xiao Qia secured the cloak for Shen Zichuan and put the fur collar on him. Seeing as Xiao Qia was still wearing a single piece of garment, Shen Zichuan asked in a quiet tone, It's about to be winter here soon. Is there still no word on the winter coats for the military? Eldest sister-in-law is thinking of a way. Xiao Qia shielded Shen Zichuan from the wind and propped himself against the carriage door. After the new year this year, come to dine with Ji Gangshifu. Shen Zichuan cast a glance behind Xiao Qia and moved in to whisper, Can I? Xiao Qia answered in a whisper too, Hurry up and come marry me to make things clear to my father. Otherwise, we'll keep looking like we are having a clandestine love affair. How would Shen Zichuan know that Xiao Qia had already laid out his cards on the table to Li Bei? He actually nodded on hearing him and said, "Eldest sister-in-law even gave me a set of bracelets the last time. I'll send a gift in return during the new year." Xiao Qia found Lanzhao adorable. He laughed and stroked Shen Zichuan's cheek again. "The armored cavalry will follow along on your way back. Write me a letter when you reach Cizhou. I'll return to Bianbui camp in another 3 or 4 days. It's closer. I'll write you a stack." Shen Zichuan slowed down his speech, as if that would slow down time. "The fan isn't made yet. I was so busy I forgot all about it." Xiao Qia touched the jade earring lightly with his fingertip. "I'll craft a new one for you after the new year," Shen Zichuan said. "Then, I'm leaving." Xiao Qia lowered his head to enter, but before he could move closer, Shen Zichuan cupped his cheeks and kissed him. This kiss was brief, a touch lasting just a fleeting moment. Xiao Qia rose to leave the carriage, then put the curtain down and took a few steps back. Fei Xing stood at the side, wanting to say a few words to ingratiate himself with him, but before he could say a word, Xiao Qia pressed him over. Wherever Lanzhao is, the expression in Xiao Qia's eyes was cold and detached. "You better be there." One Fei Xing felt as if it was an iron vice gripping him by the nape, suffocating him until he could scarcely breathe. He nodded hastily, and Xiao Qia let him go. The horse carriage began to roll. Xiao Qia stood where he was and watched as the carriage left. Shen Zichuan tugged the curtain open. Half of the Hongyan mountains behind Xiao Qia were partially concealed among the clouds and mist while the wind howled. At this very moment, Xiao Qia's figure oddly overlapped with the Hongyan mountains. Shen Zichuan gazed at him. Several falcons suddenly circled out of the wind, and the head of the cast of falcons, Meng, let loose a cry that reverberated through the camp. Military tents of all sizes instantly lifted their entrance flaps, while a long whistle sounded from the top of the watchtower. When Xiao Fengshu stepped out of his tent, his battle steed was already in position. He held his blade and flipped atop the horse, where he said in a deep voice, "Squad 3 to guard the camp. Vanguards to move first. Convoy squad, turn around immediately and retreat down to Shar camp to protect the military craftsmen." As Xiao Qia stepped back, he put on his helmet and turned to mount Lang Tao Shuijin, which had just trotted over. The wind was so strong Shen Zichuan could not open his eyes. He clung on to the carriage door, watching as Xiao Qia receded further and further away amidst the strong wind. The clouds dispersed, scattering into millions of snowflakes that danced in the skies of Libei. The first snow of the battlefield had come. At the third quarter of the hour of Yin, Li Jianting opened her eyes right on time. She sat up, and the palace maid in attendance stepped up to pull up the heavy drapes. Fengquan, dressed in the official robes of eunuchs, nimbly and diligently helped Li Jianting to put on her shoes. Mu Ru assassinated Li Jianheng, and Fengquan found a scapegoat. All this while, he had been hiding in the Shui's residence, and after Li Jianheng's burial, he became Li Jianting's personal eunuch. Now that Li Jianting was living in the palace, Fengquan returned with her. At first, Shui Xiuzhou did not plan to use him again, but Li Jianting insisted, so Fengquan changed his name and continued to stay at Li Jianting's side. Li Jianting did not sleep well. She did not seem to have adapted to this massive bedchamber as yet. All the palace maids serving the heir apparent to the throne knew that Li Jianting only allowed Fengquan to remain serving in the hall at night. As they waited outside, they would occasionally hear the sound of her being trapped in the throes of a nightmare. The people in the bedchamber moved lightly and softly as they soundlessly helped Li Jianting dress. When she was all properly presented, Fengquan stepped forth with a bow and lifted his sleeve to carefully affix the flower embellishment too on her forehead. The heir apparent to the throne did not suit fair colors. She was best decked out in scarlet red. By the hour of Mao, Li Jianting was already waiting under the eaves for the various officials participating in the classics colloquium to come over for lectures. It was windy today, and Fengquan covered her with a cloak before standing at the side to shield her from the wind. He was so freezing cold that his lips turned purple. Li Jianting looked at Feng Quan and said, "It's already autumn. Didn't the caps and kerchief service issue new coats?" Feng Quan was not permitted to look at Li Jianting directly, so he turned slightly to her and answered, "To reply, Your Highness, they did." Li Jianting raised a finger to touch her own cloak, but it promptly dawned on her that every single move of hers as she stood here was being watched. It was indeed inappropriate for her to undress for an eunuch, and it would easily give others grounds for gossip. She looked towards the upturned eaves shrouded in gloom a short distance away and paused for a moment, but in the end she did not say a word more. She did not know if there had been a delay on the way here today, but the officials were late to arrive. Li Jianting stood until her legs went numb. She looked at Feng Quan again, and this time she saw Feng Xuan's ear in the dimness. Feng Quan thought Li Jianting was cold, so he said, "This slave shall send someone over to take a look. You have an ear piercing." Li Jianting gazed fixedly at Feng Xuan's ear. Feng Quan looked abruptly at Li Jianting and subconsciously thought of blocking his ear. But very quickly, he lowered his eyes and nodded quietly as he cautiously slowed his breathing. He found this tiny hole in his ear a nightmare, one that made him gag indistinctly and amplified his panic under Li Jianting's silence. After a long interval, Li Jianting saw an eunuch leading the officials over towards the eaves. She nodded her head respectfully and waited for them. As she lowered her head, she said softly, "Looks really nice." At the same time the officials lifted the curtain, Feng Quan threw a swift glance at Li Jianting. But Li Jianting did not look at him. It was as if she had not spoken at all as she bent over and followed the gentleman in. The fists that Feng Quan had hidden under his sleeves broke out in sweat. He retreated to the side of the door, and after a long period of time, he stealthily looked askance through the gaps in the door curtain where he saw the hem of Li Jianting's skirt, feeling bewildered and uncertain of her words earlier. Shen Zichuan's return journey was not considered quick. The roads were difficult to maneuver on a rainy and snowy day, and Fei Xing dared not be careless for fear that Shen Zichuan would fall ill on the way. As such, he attended to everything personally. Even with the Libei armored cavalry's accompaniment, the inner sides of the horse carriage continued to be guarded by the imperial bodyguards. The daily brewing of medicine was also supervised by Fei Xing himself. The horse carriage came to a stop after passing the Bienbois camp. The bridle paths had been damaged by mudslides, and repairs would delay the journey by a day. Consequently, the troops opted to spend the night in the open. Shen Zichuan stepped off the horse carriage, and brought Ding Tao along to walk the horse further ahead. "Has young master given this horse a name yet?" Walking backwards, Ding Tao pillowed his arms at the back of his head and asked. "Feng Ta Shuang Yi." Leading the horse along, Shen Zichuan stroked its mane. Ding Tao clenched his fist in understanding. "What a great name! It goes perfectly together with Master's Lang Tao Shui Jin." Shen Zichuan looked towards the south, and Ding Tao turned to do the same. He said, "Riding in that direction for 8 or 9 days will bring you to Dunzhou." So close. Shen Zichuan had not expected that. "I don't see any of Libei's relay stations in the vicinity. They used to exist, but were deserted afterwards," Ding Tao said. "Now everyone has headed northeast to fight with the Bianxia people." Shen Zichuan let out a breath of hot air, turned his gaze away, and continued strolling for a while more with Ding Tao. At night, Fei Xing led his men on overnight duty. He sat alongside the Libei armored cavalry and warmed himself by the campfire. He shrank his neck back and said, "Libei is seriously cold. It isn't even winter yet and there is already snow on the battlefields. It's indeed not easy on my fellow brothers. Here, have some meat." The accompanying Libei armored cavalry was a brigade commander of the Mobile Corps. He did not stand on ceremony with Fei Xing, and sat around the fire with the rest of them as he gorged on meat. The snow in Libei always comes early. In previous years, we would be going home around this time, leaving only a few battalions to guard the frontier. "I don't think this war will stop." Fei Xing accepted the proffered on horseback, and took a few mouthfuls. The resulting burn made him cheer with appreciative satisfaction. If it wasn't for all of you holding the fort here, all the prefectures down south would have to suffer. It can't be helped. The brigade commander ate until he was all ruddy in the face. We are the Libei armored cavalry. Fei Xing got emotional in an instant. Everyone says that the Libei armored cavalry is the bastion of iron of the north. All of you are true warriors of iron. I was already in great awe back in Kudu. That old Han dog loved to get all jealous when he saw that Libei was in the emperor's favor and kept spouting bullshit. I couldn't take it lying down and contradicted him multiple times. Now that I've actually arrived in Libei, it turns out that I was right. All my fellow brothers here are men worthy of befriending. In the future, if anyone were to come to Tsizhou for work, don't prepare a thing. Once you get off your horse, go to the yamen and give them my name, and I'll make the arrangements for everyone here. Thrilled, the brigade commander patted Fei Xing and commended, a worthy friend indeed. Everyone had a merry time chatting and feasting on quite the amount of meat. The fire was not extinguished at night to prevent wolves from being lured in by the aroma. The Libei armored cavalry had a night patrol squad which made a few rounds in the vicinity. When they returned, they leaned over and said a few words in the brigade commander's ear. The brigade commander wiped his mouth and curbed his expression. Put on your armors. Fei Xing immediately stood up after him. The imperial bodyguards in the back were instantly wide awake too. Shen Zichuan had yet to sleep. He sat in the horse carriage, reading the latest letters from Tsizhou under the candlelight. On hearing footsteps, he asked without raising his head, "Someone's nearby?" Holding onto his blade, Fei Xing stood by the carriage and spoke quickly. Libei's night patrol squad discovered traces of horse carriage tracks in the south. Master, this place is close to Bianbo camp. When the Bianbo camp was attacked during the 6th month, it was also from the south that the stone catapult had come around. Although Fei Xing was a chatterbox, his observation skills were impeccable, and his intelligence gathering was first-rate. While he did not possess Ding Tao's photographic memory, he could retain everything he had ever transcribed in his mind. He would not miss out on any traces. Let the armored cavalry lead the way. Shen Zichuan donned his cloak and disembarked the horse carriage. Send someone to follow after them first. Don't alert the enemy. Fei Xing responded with a sound of affirmation. Shen Zichuan observed the canopy of heaven, then looked towards the south. The southern side is adjacent to Dunzhou. If we really run into the Bianxia cavalry's transportation escort squad, then it is very likely that they took a detour around Dunzhou. Fei Xing dredged the mud by his feet and got up. It just snowed a few days back. The bridle path here has fallen into disrepair, making the path hard to travel. The military supplies they carry are extremely heavy, so they must have arranged for quite the number of people to follow along as guarded escorts. Send someone to follow them first. Shen Zichuan thought for a moment. The carriage shall follow after. We can make it in time to Dunzhou for a look. The Prince of Jianxing's residence was in Dunzhou. It was Shen Wei's former home grounds. Fei Xing did not dare to make wild guesses. He turned around to instruct the men, then extinguished the campfire to wipe out all traces of them before keeping up pace with the others under the cover of the night. Chapter 166. Lure. Chapter 166. Lure. Early in the morning, Shen Zichuan stared fixedly at those messy footprints and asked Fei Xing, "Does it belong to a grain wagon?" The tracks left by the wheels were very distinct, a clear sign that it had been carrying a heavy load. Heavier than a grain wagon. Fei Xing dropped to one knee and scrutinized it for a moment. It looks like it was carrying some kind of heavy weaponry. Master, they went to the trouble of taking a detour to Libei. Could they be thinking of launching another raid? The Shasen camp is now well equipped and well trained. With Guowei stationed there, and its location so close to Bianbo camp, it would be difficult to get anything good out of a raid without a large number of troops to back them up. Shen Zichuan faced the south. Furthermore, they are coming from Dunzhou. It's possible that they're thinking of transporting supplies to the border along the Chashi River. But what was there in Dunzhou? Duanzhou's granaries had long been squandered clean by the bandit. Furthermore, there were no garrison troops in Dunzhou, so why bother taking an unnecessary detour? Shen Zichuan thought carefully for a moment, running through everything he remembered about Dunzhou. He recalled that the Biancha cavalry had used a stone catapult when they raided Bianbua camp during the 6th month. Taking a few steps along the wheel tracks, he suddenly spoke. Military supplies, provisions, armaments. He turned back. After the defeat of the Zhongbua troops, the Ministry of War didn't reclaim the armories of the 6 prefectures, intending to leave it for the re-established garrison troops. However, Kudu was later negligent in their inspection rounds, and all of these armories were not mentioned again. Not bothering with the mud on his knee, Fei Xing stood up. Among them are plenty of heavy weaponry meant for sieges. If they fall in the hands of Biancha, then Duanzhou will be in imminent danger. Continue to follow them, Shen Zichuan said. The wheels got stuck in the mud, and the horses could not pull them out. Luer, who was wrapped up in a coat and wearing a Bianga hat, wanted to huddle up into a bundle, but he did not manage to do so. That Biancha man disguised as a traveling merchant yanked him by the ankle and dragged him off the wagon, then he lashed at him with the horsewhip to wake him up as he cursed, "Get up! Go push the wagon!" Luer awed a few times and hurriedly crawled to his feet before limping over to push the wagon. He was advanced in age, and his hands were shaky. Someone stomped on his feet and nearly made him kneel from the pain. There were many bandits escorting this wagon. All of their blades had been seized by the Biancha men, and they were now toiling as manual labor under the cracks of horsewhips. The bandits of Mount Luo returned home crestfallen following their defeat in Xizhou, and news that Lei Jingzhou was a spy for the imperial army spread like wildfire. Subsequently, Mount Luo split up into over 10 small mountain strongholds that fought tooth and nail with one another. Luer, Dingniu, and the others each formed their own band of bandits, wanting to recreate Lei Changming's glory and become the chief of Mount Luo. But who knew that they would be disbanded in Duanzhou by bandits who had the help of the Biancha cavalry? Not only did they lose their main forces, but they were also recaptured as the Biancha cavalry's prisoners. Dingniu refused to transport grains for the Biancha cavalry and was killed at the end of the 7th month. Luer, cherishing his life, did not dare to resist any further and was now transporting the grain wagons for the Biancha people. Luer hunched over like a monkey, his long, drooping eyebrows quivering along with his movements. He blended in among the crowd, not daring to slack off right under the Biancha men's eyes. But even so, he did not escape a lashing. Luer grimaced in pain and tried his best to make himself smaller so that others would block the blows for him. The road was hard to navigate, and ragged panting filled the chilly night. These bandits who were used to riding roughshod over the others could not hold up against the lashings of the Biancha people, and there were quite a number of people who were whipped until their skins flayed open and their fleshes were torn. The horse wagon came to a stop only during the hour of evening. Several rows of cavalry roved around the surroundings, hollering at the bandits to assemble and stand properly. Luer's coat had been shredded to ribbons by the whips, with wads of cotton spilling out. He held his arms around himself and waded in the muddy marsh with a build-up of a thin layer of ice on it. His robe was already a piece of rag now, and both legs of his trouser fluttered to reveal a pair of legs that looked like hemp stalks. The old man was so freezing cold that he shivered. The Biancha men wanted to eat, so the bandits could only stand at their sides to shield them from the wind. Luer folded his arms up his sleeves. He was so hungry he was seeing stars. He licked his lips and quietly squatted down to take a rest. When will these shitty days come to an end? A former subordinate before him muttered as he took off the cloth bag stuffed on his back and secured it on his waist. God damn it, they are going to whip me to death this trip. These motherfuckers really don't hold back. whipping people like we are some livestock. Luer shifted his feet. He was so hungry he could taste the bile in his mouth, and yet he was still thinking of taking a smoke. He fumbled in his sleeves for a long time before fishing out some tobacco, whereupon he brought it to his nose and sniffed hard. They aren't educated, that's why they treated people as livestock, no? Those tattoos on their bodies are all of beasts and birds of prey. Heck, they even drink blood raw. The former subordinate spat. If I had known I'd end up this way, I'd have switched camp and joined the Imperial Army back in Seijo. Damn it. At least it wouldn't have given the Biantia people an advantage. Bullocks. Luer stuffed the tobacco back and sneakily peeked at the Biantia men through other people's legs. We are all bandits. What good ends can we come to by defecting over to the Imperial Army? We would still be traitors. These military weapons are being sent over to fight Li Bei and Zhongbua. Who knows? Maybe even the Emperor in Kudu will be taken prisoner when the time comes. We might still even have to kneel to a Biantia emperor. Luer had not even finished his words when his former subordinate suddenly pulled him up. With his legs trembling, Luer stuck close to them and stood straight, not even daring to glance around arbitrarily. The Biantia man was called Jida. His head was cleanly shaven, and the muscular arms he exposed had a poisonous scorpion tattooed on it. He passed by them while wiping his mouth, the expression in his eyes causing Luer's legs to tremble even harder, so much that he was about to pee his pants. But Jida did not give them any trouble tonight and merely led his man to the front where the supply wagon carrying the mounted crossbow too was parked. The Biantia people were very interested in giant siege weapons, such as the mounted crossbows. The bandits remained where they were and rested. All their field rations were soaked and smelled musty. With his yellow tobacco-stained teeth, Luer ate the rations. The few of them huddled together to keep warm. Fortunately, it did not rain tonight, or the amount of people who froze to death would be more than just a few. They sat on the ground, not daring to fall asleep. But Luer was old. It gradually became harder for him to hang in there, and he eventually dozed off against the wheel. Such a small number of troops following along? Fei Xing squatted down once again and examined the footprints. Most of them are bandits pushing the wagon along. There aren't that many Biantia cavalry. The brigade commander put on his helmet and sat on his horse like a statue cast in iron. As he pulled the reins on his horse, he spoke in a deep, muffled voice. They are in disguise because they don't want to alert others. I'm afraid they still have planted agents in Mount Luo. Otherwise, they wouldn't dare to penetrate this far with these few people. Prefectural Lord, if you want to get to the bottom of who is on the inside collaborating with them, then we have to intercept them before they enter Mount Luo's territory and interrogate them. There were not that many men from the Li Bei armored cavalry following along, but they were all elites on the battlefields who had fought the Hanshi tribe with Xiaofangshu. With the Imperial bodyguard's assistance in battle on such a dark night where the frost was heavy, intercepting this small batch of people would not be a problem. Shen Zichuan took a look at the darkness of the night and ordered, Ding Tao, stay where you are. Fei Xing, go with the Li Bei armored cavalry. Luer woke up from the freezing cold and rubbed both of his feet, feeling as if he was going to freeze to death. He raised his head and saw the Biantia cavalry standing a distance ahead, crowding around the mounted crossbow. This crossbow was not something that could be drawn on one man's strength alone. Usually, it would be used to bring up the rear and hold the battle array or to defend cities. It was an absolute heavy-duty weapon in combat and common in the Li Bei's camps. The Biantia cavalry had suffered and taken quite the beating in its hands. Luer did not call out to anyone. He propped his hands on the ground and used the wagon as a cover to make his way quietly to the back. He crawled under the bottom of the wagon, sticking close to the ground to hide from view. When he crawled to the end, he practically kicked out with his shoes and lunged forward, cutting a sorry figure as he broke into a run. Jida was wiping the arrow when he caught a flash in his peripheral vision. He bellowed in Biantia language, "Someone's fleeing." The Biantia cavalry instantly mounted their horses and brandished their whips as they bellowed and chased after him. How in the world would Luer expect Jida to be so sharp-eyed? To think he could still catch sight of him from such a distance away, and in such a dark night too. He thought of stopping and giving them the excuse that he was merely taking a pee, but when he looked back and saw all those scimitars drawn out of their scabbards, he knew he would die if he did not escape tonight. Luer anxiously tightened his waist sash and kicked off his shoes in the mud. He fell, then climbed to his feet. All he could see before him was the way Ding Yo looked when he died. They were able to rise to prominence on Mount Luo all because of the Biantia cavalry, and now, it was also all because of the Biantia cavalry that they had become prisoners on Mount Luo. Luer muttered unintelligibly as he prayed for help and pleaded with all the deities and Buddhas he knew of. Sores that had formed on this old man's soles made him scrunch up his face in pain. He was so fearful of death to the extent he even wanted to kneel now and beg for mercy. But the bellows and cursings of the Biantia cavalry made it clear that it would not be a simple matter of capturing Luer back. They had no lack of people. What they lacked were chickens they could slaughter in public. Luer shivered and fell into the mud-hole. The Biantia cavalry surrounded him, and Luer promptly burst out crying. He raised both hands and felt himself peeing his pants in the icy cold, muddy water. The foul, turbid stench of urine soaked through the legs of his trousers. Luer could not understand the Biantia language, and could only kowtow to the cavalry in terror. "I'm at fault," Luer wailed hysterically. "Don't kill me." The Biantia cavalry coughed a couple of times and spat thick phlegm on Luer's face. They smashed their scabbards down into Luer's back, making him sprawl in the mud-hole and drink filthy water. Both of Luer's long, drooping brows were lifted by the scimitars, and he drank that water in fear, crying and laughing as snots and tears soiled his face. Jida stood where he was and watched as the cavalry amused themselves with Luer. He propped up a leg and kicked away the fabric cover of the mounted crossbow, then shouted for the men to drag Luer further away so that he could use Luer to test the crossbow. Luer was scared out of his wits on hearing the sound of the mounted crossbow being shifted. He kneeled on the ground as they dragged him away, slapping himself with both hands while cursing. Why the heck did he run? Luer slapped himself until his cheeks were red and swollen. They hoisted him up and hung him a distance away. Luer bent over at the waist and took in huge gasps of air as he watched the cavalry load the mounted crossbow with an arrow. That arrow was as thick as a child's arm, and its arrowhead was unusual, with a rounded end cast out of iron. When they rained down from the sky, the impact could send one's brain matter splattering all over. The wheel and axle started turning with a click. As long as Jida pulled the trigger, Luer would be able to see that arrow springing up high in the sky before hurtling down on himself. Luer voicelessly moved his mouth. In an unexpected burst of courage, he bared his yellow-stained teeth and burst out cursing, "Fuck your ancestors! Fuck all of your ancestors!" Tears streamed down Luer's face as he choked with sobs so hard he looked as if he could breathe his last any time. He used to be a bandit in the past too, but he was not alone. He had a son and daughters back at home, and his wonderful wife was his childhood sweetheart who had followed him out of the village. It was only when husband and wife were past their prime that they bore 3 children. Of them, 2 were daughters who had been match-made in the 3rd year of Xianda and would have been able to get married once winter that year passed. His son wanted to join the garrison troops, and Luer spent a long time buttering up to Lei Changming before he managed to send his son into the Duanzhou garrison troops. But in the end, the entire Duanzhou garrison troops perished in the Chaucer sinkhole that year, the year the Biantia cavalry came to massacre the city. Chapter 167, Guest. Chapter 167, Guest Warning. Violence, brutality. The sky was dark and devoid of stars. Luer huffed white puffs of air in between gasps. He could no longer tell if he was dead or alive. He hung there, light as a feather, like a piece of cotton wadding in the wind. Jida could not operate the mounted crossbow. He shoved aside the subordinates by his side to check on it and continued to inquire about it in the Biancha language. As they were unfamiliar with such heavy weaponry, the subordinates called for a few bandits to take a look. Jida unscrewed his canteen to have a drink of water as he stood bare-chested in the chilly night and waited. Fearing that he would be implicated and face the same outcome as Lure, the former subordinate lay prone on the ground, not daring to move an inch. He stared at the trampled mud on the ground and saw the subtle tremors coursing through it. Thinking that it was caused by his own rapid breathing, he used both hands to cover his mouth and nose, but those tremors did not stop. Instead, they became even more pronounced. Jida was the first to sense something amiss. He stopped drinking and listened intently for a moment. Suddenly, he threw his canteen onto the ground and shouted, "The armored cavalry is here!" But it was too late. The Libe armored cavalry that had been creeping forth for half the night in the darkness was like a fierce tiger pouncing with force so great that the wagon by Jida's side overturned with a loud crash. The startled horses neighed as they were dragged to the ground by the wagon that weighed up to 100 jin. That mounted crossbow sent mud splashing, and the wagons beside the former subordinate also shifted along with it. Several of the supply wagons haphazardly collided against one another without warning, and at that moment, chaos erupted as men and horses were thrown off their feet. Jida retreated swiftly and kept calm as he shouted, "Mount your horses!" The Libe armored cavalry's battle steeds wore a full body of armor, and the sound of their hooves as they drew nearer sounded like muffled thunder to the ear. The heavily armed armored cavalry held no fear of the scimitars. They were like a dark, swarthy wall that directly cut across and broke the formation of the Biancha's transportation squad. The battle steeds, donned in armors of iron gilded with long and thick spikes at the chest, were unstoppable when they charged straight on. Unable to run fast enough, the Biancha cavalry was thrown to the ground and successively trampled to a bloody pulp before they could get back up. The helmeted brigade commander gestured with his hand to Fei Xing at the side. Fei Xing, lightly armored one on his horse, circled over into position and lowered his long sword together with the brigade commander, and in one coordinated move, charged towards Jida to flank him in a pincer attack. Jida mounted his horse, as if he had not sensed Fei Xing approaching. He leaned over, and the pony under his crotch broke into a run like the fearsome wind. Jida stared fixedly at the brigade commander as their horses crossed paths in the blink of an eye. The brigade commander abruptly swung his long sword, intending to hack off Jida's head, but his swing had missed the mark, for Jida seemed to have disappeared into thin air. In the next instant, a blunt weapon slammed hard into the back of the brigade commander's head. The force of the impact instantaneously made him bleed from the mouth and nose and deafened him. That nearly sealed and airtight iron armor could stand up to blows from all sharp weapons, but had a fatal weakness: it could not withstand the impact of blunt weapons. The brigade commander tumbled off the back of the horse and fell headlong to the ground. His ears were ringing like crazy, and he even felt sharp, stabbing pain. He tried to crawl to his feet, but his entire body was trembling too violently. Blood trickled out through the gap in his helmet. He could not hear his own voice clearly, but he continued to move his lips. Take off the hell." The iron hammer smashed down onto the back of the brigade commander's head once again. Blow after blow rained down on him, crushing that helmet until it was all deformed. Blood plasma spilled all over the ground. The brigade commander went silent. Jida squatted on the brigade commander's back and wiped off the blood on his scorpion tattoo, then stuck his fingers into his mouth. Contained in those sturdy muscles of his was a shocking amount of explosive strength. He lifted the iron hammer and locked his gaze on Fei Xing. Fei Xing felt his hairs stand on end, while the horse under him tossed its head in fear. Fei Xing swallowed with difficulty. He had served as an imperial bodyguard for so many years, and to think he would be daunted back into a retreat by the expression in the other party's eyes. This was no ordinary Biancha cavalryman. This was not even one of the Biancha's elite forces. They were unlike Hassan's elite troops who carried scimitars and pike daggers. Instead, they were equipped with scimitars and iron hammers with protruding spikes. This was a Biancha force that had never made an appearance before on the Libe battlefield. Too terrifying. A strangled gasp escaped from Fei Xing's throat. If such an iron hammer were to be delivered to the battlegrounds, then the Libe cavalry would become livestock at their mercy. All the advantages they derived from their armors would be rendered useless. Retreat. Fei Xing yanked the reins and suddenly bellowed, "Retreat!" They had to shake them off. Fei Xing turned the horse around and broke into a desperate run. But things did not go as planned. This peculiar, treacherous troop tailed him like shadows. It was clear that Jida had locked on to him as a target as he relentlessly followed hot on his trail. Both parties engaged in a cat-and-mouse chase in the darkness of the night. Fei Xing had finally gotten his taste of the Biancha cavalry that rumors were made of. The horse beneath him was a fine steed too, but it could not throw them off and widen the distance between them at all. Jida remained close on his heels. Jida's iron hammer came swinging at the back of Fei Xing's head, and Fei Xing, on sensing it, dodged by the skin of his teeth. The horse was running too fast, and all those jolts and bumps nearly caused Fei Xing to slip off. He was far from being as adept at horsemanship as the Biancha cavalry. At this moment, both parties were hundreds of paces away from the convoy squad. Fei Xing came to the realization that he would not be able to shake off the other party. Likewise, the other man did not give Fei Xing another chance to retreat either. Jida had already caught up with him. Fei Xing was not one of the Libe armored cavalry. The iron hammer was not that much of a threat to him. Thus, Jida swapped back to his scimitar. That crescent moon-like blade caught onto Fei Xing's Xiuquan blade. The squads behind, having already converged together, began to fight at close quarters. Both men were still galloping on their horses as they barged headlong into the sparse forest. Withered branches lashed hard against his face. Fei Xing could not draw back his ensnared blade at all. Jida revealed a cruel smile as he said to Fei Xing in the Dazhou language with perfect enunciation, "You are welcome to be our guest." Fei Xing wanted to retort back, but he was too preoccupied to speak. At the same time Jida leaned forward, he yanked his scimitar back, and Fei Xing's Xiuquan blade promptly slipped from his hand and went flying. Following right after, his horse was rammed from the side, which knocked Fei Xing off it. In the instant he rolled to the ground, he reached for the short blade from the side of his waist and brought it up before his face to parry the blow. Jida's scimitar slipped from his hand along with the Xiuquan blade. He relaxed his entire right arm and swung the hammer up into Fei Xing's face. The blade Fei Xing used to ward off the blow caved in from the impact, and his forearm went numb. He reacted swiftly and rolled away, then cast away the ruined blade. Unarmed, he maintained a certain distance away from Jida. Stooping over at his waist, Fei Xing continued his retreat. He adjusted his breathing, then made a shoo sound at Jida as if to drive him away. Enraged now, Jida gripped his hammer tightly, but at the very moment he swung it up, he felt a sudden weight on his back. Ding Tao strangled Jida's burly neck with an arm from behind and strained to call out, "Da Xiong." Before Ding Tao could finish his words, Jida grabbed him by the arm and yanked, intending to fling Ding Tao over the side of his shoulder to the ground, but a figure sprinted out from the side and lunged headlong at him, slamming his head into the side of Jida's waist. The impact from Li Xiong caused Jida to stagger, and Ding Tao seized the opportunity to break free. Li Xiong had been hiding in the horse carriage these days, having the time of his life eating. He stretched out both arms at once to wrap them around Jida's waist, then assumed the horse stance with the intent to lift Jida like he would a tree trunk. Jida swung the hammer and slammed it into Li Xiong's back. Li Xiong cried out in pain and shouted, "Taozi, that hurts." Ding Tao rubbed his numbed arm and said quickly, "Hit him with the Ji clan's fist." Thus, Li Xiong loosened his grip and bellowed as he threw out a fist at Jida's chest. Surprisingly enough, the force knocked Jida back 2 steps. Happy, Li Xiong followed up with several consecutive punches, every blow of his striking flesh. He remembered all that Ji Gang had taught clearly. With the air of one unrivaled, he looked back and said, "He can't fight." Li Xiong had yet to finish his words when Jida backhandedly smashed him with the hammer and knocked him over to the ground. Even if this lad was a sturdy one, he could not withstand the blow. Fortunately, he reacted extremely swiftly and bent his arms to shield his head. But even so, the force of the blow knocked a tooth out. With blood in his mouth, he spat the tooth to the ground and felt the first spark of anger. "Blockhead! Get up!" Ding Tao yelled anxiously. Unable to get to his feet in time, Li Xiong could only roll out of the way for all he was worth. That hammer scraped past his cheek and slammed into the ground. Mud splashed Li Xiong full in the head. He repeatedly spat out the muddy water in his mouth. Ding Tao hit upon an idea in a display of quick thinking and stirred the mud with his brush. Treading on Li Xiong's shoulder, he said, "Go!" With a sudden flick of the brush, muddy water splashed into Jida's eyes. Jida hastily wiped it away. Taking advantage of the opportunity Ding Tao accorded him, Li Xiong propped both hands against the ground and slid over in an attempt to slip through under Jida's crotch. But he was too sturdy and he had only just slid halfway when he got stuck. This lad had a one-track mind. He just had to go this way, and as he lifted himself with brute force, he knocked Jida over instead of sliding his way out. Ding Tao wanted to praise Li Xiong. Unexpectedly, Jida wiped away the muddy water and hauled Ding Tao by the ankle that Ding Tao had yet to retract. Ding Tao had come to grief many times in the past with this move, so he had long since learned to play it smart. The instant he felt the grip on his ankle, he promptly lifted both arms to protect the back of his head and closed his eyes as he plummeted to the ground. Immediately right after the fall, he shouted, "It doesn't hurt. I'm fine." Li Xiong climbed to his feet from the mud and tried to lunge over to hold Jida's neck in a chokehold, but he had only just pounced when Jida, who was already on guard, bent his elbow and slammed it into the bridge of Li Xiong's nose. Li Xiong instantly felt a stinging ache on the bridge of his nose. Jida followed up with another blow and sent Li Xiong flipping over into the mud, using so much force that blood spurted out of Li Xiong's mouth and nose. Jida moved his shoulders and arms about, the creak of which indicated that the fight earlier was just a joke in which he had been merely fooling around. His arms were far more thick and burly than Li Xiong's. As Li Xiong lay in the mud covering his nose and mouth, he caught a vague glimpse of the poisonous scorpion on Jida's arm. Ding Tao was lifted upside down, and the brush and notebook in his bosom slipped out along with the poisonous needles and secret weapons on him when Jida swung him up with all his might. Ding Tao reached out with both hands to grab them, failing which he yelled, "My candies!" But before he could bat an eyelash, Ding Tao saw his oil paper-wrapped candies fall into a hand. Wind swept past their ears, and in this very instant, Jida saw a flutter of white sleeves descend onto the muddy surface, like a piece of drifting snow that arrived with the wind and then took off into the air again. The cold glint of Yang Shan Shui was like the crystal-clear ripples of autumn waters as it suddenly shot right towards Jida's chest. Jida could not retreat, so he cast Ding Tao aside in an attempt to free a hand to grab hold of Yang Shan Shui's tip. However, Yang Shan Shui was too fast. It took just an instant for the blade to make its way before his chest. Jida failed to grab hold of it, and Yang Shan Shui flicked up in tandem with the white sleeve to slash towards Jida's throat. This time, Jida swung his shoulder over to dodge it, using his shoulder to take the blow in the flesh instead. An expert! Jida's alarm bells went off. But then, it instantly dawned on Jida. Even though Shen Zichuan was as swift as a thunderbolt, that one blow of his earlier had also exposed the frailty of his constitution. Jida let loose a sardonic smile and struck out towards the side of Shen Zichuan's neck with a lightning move of his hand. As the white robe withdrew and seamlessly dodged out of the way like clouds and mist, He closed in and balled his fists to counter Shen Zichuan's attacks, then grabbed hold of Yang Shan Shui with a turn of his hand. With Yang Shan Shui held down, Shen Zichuan's arm also ended up being grabbed by Jida. Jida knew the other man was not an easy one to capture. With the latter's leg movements coincidentally restricted, Jida seized this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and turned around so that his back was pressed up against Shen Zichuan, then lowered his shoulder to fling Shen Zichuan over to the ground. Shen Zichuan almost coughed out blood from the force of it. He did not manage to break free when he got up, and sharp cracks rang out as he traded 2 blows with Jida with his hands. Jida, however, warded off his blows with sheer brute force. Jida was not that meticulous in his study of martial arts, and he did not want to waste too much effort on Shen Zichuan over this. As he parried the blows, he sensed Shen Zichuan abandoning the use of Yang Shan Shui, so when Shen Zichuan rose with a lift of his waist, he swung his hammer over. This strike sent the hammer smashing into the tree trunk, and as he had expended too much force, Jida could not pull it out. Shen Zichuan was relatively shorter, and as his pitch-black eyes locked onto Jida, Jida heard the crack of something snapping. While he could not figure out what this sound was at the moment, he could acutely sense the danger he was in. Almost immediately, he abandoned his hammer. But before Jida could make a move, Shen Zichuan had already struck out at him. He was much faster than before this time, as though he had been planning for this moment since the start, waiting and luring Jida in until the latter was accustomed to the rhythm of his movements. Jida even went as far as to suspect that Shen Zichuan was not injured at all, that his frailness from before was all an act. But Jida did not have the chance anymore. Fresh blood spewed from his neck, spraying all over Shen Zichuan's face. His throat bobbed. He could not believe he would be defeated in this place. He shifted his gaze sluggishly and saw a pair of deep, unfathomable eyes. Shen Zichuan seemed to finally remember to say his greetings. With his expressive eyes half closed, he said amicably to Jida, "You are welcome to be our guest." The moment the words left his mouth, Jida fell over on his back to the ground, with half a brush sticking out of his neck. Ding Tao was still badly shaken when Shen Zichuan let his fingers drop to toss the candies into his arms. Ding Tao caught it in a daze and saw the oil paper red with blood that had already seeped all the way in. Chapter 168. Scorpion. Chapter 168. Scorpion. All at once, Fei Xing calmed down. He promptly propped himself up and came over to pick up Yang Shan Shui for Shen Zichuan. But when he bent over, he noticed something odd about Shen Zichuan's right arm. As his gaze glided up from the opening of Shen Zichuan's sleeve, he realized Shen Zichuan's entire right arm was trembling. Thick, sticky blood coated the tips of Shen Zichuan's fingers. Jida had almost broken off his fingers when they traded blows earlier, and this kind of trembling was not something he could control now that the combat had suddenly come to a halt. But he could not reveal the slightest hint of pain, given that the armored cavalry had just suffered heavy casualties. Jida had hammered the brigade commander until the latter's brain matter had splattered right before everyone's eyes. Shen Zichuan had to stabilize their morale so that it would not continue to plummet. Master, Fei Xing called out in apprehension. They are already assembling the bandits in the back to reorganize the convoy squad. Shen Zichuan always brought along the blue handkerchief on him, but he could not bear to use it to wipe the blood. This was something he had taken from Shaoqi. He continued, "Tell the Libei armored cavalry to take off their helmets. Don't panic. With the mounted crossbow bringing up the rear, the foes will be merely sitting ducks." Both of Luerhan's were shivering. He had already been released and lowered. The blowing wind was so cold it gave him a chill between the legs. The former subordinate took advantage of the chaos to drag him along, pushing and shoving as he urged, "Run, run." Luer looked stiffly at the convoy squad that had been thrown into confusion and asked feebly, Who came?" "The Libei armored cavalry." The former subordinate tore off the cloth bag on his waist and threw it away along with the chains he had been fitted with. "Let them fight." Let's go. But the former subordinate failed to move Luer, so he pinched him and cried out in anxiety, "Old man Lu, what are you doing?" Luer's feet scraped across the ground as he stooped over and refused to leave. With a savage expression, he said, "We'll leave. But we also have to give these bastards a stab before leaving." He pushed the former subordinate away and staggered forward. "Son of a bitch aimed at me with the crossbow. Those bastards." He fell onto the ground, then got up again and muttered, "I want to smash them to death. Smash them all to death." The men in Shen Zichuan's retinue, who had arrived after Shen Zichuan, summoned the bandits together to work as one and pull up the overturned wagon. The mounted crossbow was stained with mud, and Luer hastily wiped it clean with his sleeve. He squeezed among the crowd, exerting force in regular bursts along with the shouts as they hoisted the long arrows up and pulled. 100 paces away, Fei Xing scrambled out and blew a quick whistle at the imperial bodyguards still engaged in battle with the Biancha cavalry. The imperial bodyguards promptly pulled back and retreated as they held up against the remaining Libei armored cavalry. The Biancha cavalry who still remained in the clearing waited but never got Jida's commands, and by the time they realized it, it was already too late. The very moment the click of the trigger sounded, Luer felt intense pain in both arms. He watched those long arrows shoot into the sky before plunging, their impact slamming the Biancha cavalrymen who had nowhere to hide onto the ground along with their horses. It was almost instant death for the men. Luer raised both arms and burst out laughing madly. He stood on tiptoe, finding this moment to be the most gratifying time in his life. Very quickly, the arrows were depleted, and the Biancha cavalry who had been dealt severe blows were too powerless to resist. Their small numbers prevented them from getting into formation, and it just took a couple of rounds from the mounted crossbow for them to break up and scatter. The former subordinate pulled Luer by the collar and shouted over the din, "Old man Lu, we should run now." Although they were captives, they had escorted the transportation of military supplies for the Biancha people. What's more, they even led them towards Zhonghua. The Libei armored cavalry and the Biancha cavalry were sworn enemies with a blood feud between them. So if they were to fall into the Libei armored cavalry's hands, they would still have to die. Luer hurriedly leaped off the wagon and limped along. "Go, go, go! Move!" As if in tacit agreement, the bandits wanted to take to their heels and flee the moment they saw the cavalry retreating. But the squad behind them was long prepared for this and drew their blades to surround them, blocking off their paths so that they had no choice but to return to their original spot. Thrown into disarray, the bandits crowded together within the ring of horses' hooves. They wanted to break through the encirclement, but they had no blades. Gradually, they all squatted down amid the shouts at them and held their heads, not daring to make a ruckus again. Fei Xing and a few of them sent Shen Zichuan back to the horse carriage. The moment the curtain fell, they heard the dull, muffled sound of coughing. Gripping his candies, Ding Tao's eyes reddened. He was at a loss as he tugged on Fei Xing's sleeve and said in a teary tone, My young master." Fei Xing covered Ding Tao's mouth with his palm and gestured around him to have the imperial bodyguard surround the horse carriage, thus setting the carriage apart from the armored cavalry and bandits. Shen Zichuan bent over the seat. On his open palm was blood that he had just coughed out. The index and middle fingers on his right hand were racked with hot searing pain, as if they were being ripped apart. He had not bent over to pick Yang Shan Shui up earlier because he could not lift it. He lowered his head, pressing against his forehead, and forcibly swallowed down the blood that still wanted to gush up his throat. A long time passed. Shen Zichuan's voice sounded particularly low and deep across the curtain. "Do a head count of the bandits and get them to continue pushing the wagon. Send someone to rush post-haste to Bianbua camp and convey the news about this squad to Suan. Then send someone to hurry to Cizhou and inform Yuanjua to reassure Zhou before my return. As long as King Yi has not dispatched his troops, Cizhou must not make the first move, no matter what King Yi says." Then, the Biancha captives, Fei Xing moved close to the curtain and asked carefully, "Are we to keep them?" "Remove their blades and hammers." Shen Zichuan clenched his palm and shifted his gaze under the darkness. "Execute them on the spot." The sky cleared up the next day. Li Xiong crouched beside Jida's corpse, looking as if there was something he could not figure out. He kept fiddling with Jida's arm and looking at that poisonous scorpion over and over again. Fei Xing came over to boot Li Xiong and said, "Master had the others clear away the bodies. Why aren't you allowing them to?" Li Xiong was still angry. He pulled Jida's arm up and pointed to the scorpion. "Why does he have the scorpion too? He can't have a scorpion." Fei Xing initially wanted to make fun of this silly lad, but the gears started turning in his mind, and he crouched down as well to ask Li Xiong, "Why can't he have a scorpion? Have you seen this before?" Li Xiong pointed to the back of his neck and answered, "My big bro has one lying here." Fei Xing felt a chill run down his spine. With his heart in his mouth and sweat trickling down, he said, "When did Lei Jingzhe have it tattooed? Why has there never been a word of it on Mount Luo?" Li Xiong tried his best to think as he pulled at his hair. "I don't remember either. He had it a long time back. He already had it when he raised me. Gedale has a lot of scorpions. My big bro took me there at that time and even wanted to have it tattooed on me." Gedale. Fei Xing stood up at once and turned around to hurry towards the horse carriage. Shen Zichuan was still resting. He drained the medical decoction from the morning like it was water. Ding Tao, who was keeping guard outside the carriage, heard Shen Zichuan cough several times. The medicinal smell wafted out from within, but no one dared to lift the curtains. Fei Xing did not dare to either, but this was a matter of great importance, so he placed a hand on the carriage for support and called out in a soft voice, "Master, master." Shen Zichuan was sleeping lightly. In fact, he had been semi-conscious the entire time. He leaned on his side against the pillow. The delayed onset of pain of the injuries on his back was taking hold now, and he was in so much pain that he could not lie flat. He removed the jade earring and wiped it for a long time before it was clean. Only then did he open his eyes and make a sound of acknowledgement. Fei Xing, even more cautious now, reported what he had heard earlier. There was only silence from the interior of the carriage for a long time before Fei Xing heard the rustling sound of sliding sleeves. After another moment, the curtain was lifted by a folding fan. With the fan in his left hand and earring on his right ear, the expression in Shen Zichuan's eyes was much more piercing than ever. The situation last night had been so critical that no one had paid any attention. With Li Xiong now standing beside Jida, the one thing that they had overlooked had become all the more apparent. Physique-wise, Jida was essentially what Li Xiong would grow up to become as an adult. They were both powerfully built, far more than the average man. Their shoulders and arms were broad, their muscles rippling with astonishing explosive power. Shen Zichuan lowered his folding fan and moved Jida's arm over. "Is it exactly the same?" Li Xiong squatted and nodded sullenly. "Big Bro's scorpion is a little smaller." Shen Zichuan said to Fei Xing, "Strip these corpses of their clothes." Not long after, the Biancha cavalry who perished last night lay stark naked across the ground. Fei Xing examined them one at a time and found that all of them had scorpion tattoos. It was just that the scorpions were all freely positioned and hidden at locations that were hard to discover, such as the nape, pit of the stomach, side of the waist, and even behind the ear, but they were all on the upper body. Shen Zichuan asked the Libei armored cavalry, "Are there scorpions like this on the battlefields?" The remaining squad commander of the armored cavalry looked carefully at the tattoos and solemnly shook his head. "Never seen them before." The 12 tribes of Biancha indeed have the habit of tattooing their bodies, but those are either tribal totems or symbols of meritorious service. There are no scorpions in the 12 tribes. Shen Zichuan had an ill sense of foreboding. This was a squad that could deal a heavy blow and inflict heavy casualties on the Libei armored cavalry. Once they became a prevalent force in the war, the standoff on the battlegrounds would take a sudden turn for the worse. It would catch the generals of Libe off guard and put them at a disadvantage. If they were really establishing a squad based on standards that Li Xiong exemplified, then it would not matter even if they were to lose their battle steed. As long as they could breach Libe, all of Dazhou would be in imminent danger, let alone Zhongbua. Scorpions are everywhere in Gedale. Big Bro called them brothers. They are our friends. As Li Xiong spoke, he looked at Shen Zichuan. They have many small scorpions too. They are very young and never come out to play. Fei Xing. Shen Zichuan said immediately. Copy down this scorpion and bring it to Libe together. Not just Libe, but also Cizhou and Chazhou. Tell Zhou Gui and Luo Mu to start checking the commoners in the territories immediately. He paused for a moment, then emphasized his words. Especially the garrison troops. Lei Jingzhe was a native of Dazhou. In the years that Zhongbua was out of control, anyone could freely get in and out of Zhongbua as he did. They could let in the scorpions, and even send the scorpions deeper into Dazhou. What Shen Zichuan had thought of at this moment was not just the war, but also of the decaying of government administration since the reign of Yongyi. From the Zhongbua troops' defeat to Xiao Jiming's poisoning, and Feng Yixing's death in battle to Lu Guangbai's desertion. They used to focus their attention on Kudu and the noble clans, but it had all become rather odd starting from the military grain case onward. Xue Xiuzhua wanted to resurge Dazhou. Forcing Lu Guangbai into desertion would not do him any good. Why would Kudu make light of Qidong military provisions when they knew full well that there was ill will between them and Libe at the same time? Shen Zichuan's memories swiftly went backward in time. Watching scene after scene of the past flash away felt like he was once again standing in the summer heat of Kudu. Who exactly had delivered the relay report to Wei Huaigu's desk and subsequently forced him to his death? Shen Zichuan suddenly broke out coughing. He clutched the blue handkerchief and covered his mouth and nose. But this cough was so violent that it not only startled Ding Tao, even Fei Xing's face turned pale. Master! Fei Xing made to support Shen Zichuan by the arm. Escort the military supplies back to Cizhou. Shen Zichuan said behind the handkerchief. There's no need for the armored cavalry to follow any further. Leaving a few men behind will suffice. We'll head for Dunzhou today in disguise. Gedale had Bai Cha's portrait, while Dunzhou had Shen Wei's Prince of Jianqing's manor. These were the two key locations where it all began, along with the two bloodkin with inextricable ties to Shen Zichuan. I want Lei Jingzhe as well. Shen Zichuan's expression was cold and detached as he enunciated each word. Alive. Chapter 169, Duanzhou. Chapter 169. Duanzhou. The military supply wagons were placed under the guard of the Libe armored cavalry and manually transported back to Cizhou by the bandit. Shen Zichuan only brought a dozen or so imperial bodyguards and some goods with him, as he disguised himself as a traveling merchant heading north. They did not head down to Dunzhou directly, but took a detour to the public route leading from Fanzhou to Dunzhou and entered through the west gate. Luer with his Byanga hat, followed behind Fei Xing with his but sticking out. As long as his eyes started roving, the imperial bodyguards would sandwich him in the middle so that he felt suffocated and could not move. He used to be Lei Jingzhe's messenger, so he was well informed and the most familiar with the ongoings in Dunzhou. They would save a lot of trouble by getting him to lead the way. But this old man was a very crafty one. At first, in order to escape, he had smeared his face until it was all dark and swarthy, causing Fei Xing to nearly miss him when he blended in with the group of bandits. Shen Zichuan's medicine never stopped coming, and after being on the road for 5 days, his cough gradually subsided. However, he was still unable to apply too much pressure on the 2 fingers on his right hand. Given that he could not even pen letters these days, the messages to Libe and Cizhou were all written by Ding Tao on his behalf. When we enter the city, we have to first go to a pawnshop to register the goods. Luo tugged on the side of his Byanga hat to hide his face, then folded his arms under his sleeves and craned his neck to say, "It's very chaotic now in Dunjo. Only merchants who are registered and listed at the pawn shop can enter the city and stay at the inns. All the parties are playing it cautious. This is an unspoken rule. Anyone who doesn't know the rules is most certainly fishy." Shun Zichuan rested his folding fan on his knee. He remained concealed from view in the carriage, revealing only a vague silhouette. "Who owns this pawnshop?" "The Yen clan of Huzhou." Luo lowered his voice and moved closer to the side of the carriage curtain. When Lei Changming still had the Yen clan to fund him, this place was a terrible mess. While it was said that Lei Changming was the one in charge, he was, after all, not the provincial administration commissioner. Bandits like us don't have that many staff and runners either, so we turned a blind eye when it came to what's happening down there. But there were too many merchants coming and going. Who knows if they are spies? So young Master Yen suggested Lei Changming set up a pawn shop here and hang up the words, Tongming. Brothers who conduct business deals with the Mount Luo bandits naturally know how to answer upon entering the shop. The Yen clan later fell out with us, but Lei Changming kept this pawnshop as a show of respect for young Master Yen. The corner of Shun Zichuan's lips shifted ever so slightly. And with that, the Yen clan has the comings and goings in Dunjo firmly in their grasp, with records of every business transaction Lei Changming has ever made. This young Master Yen must no doubt be better acquainted with these years' accounts than Lei Changming himself, right? He's a child prodigy, yes? Luo smacked his lips. Not one business deal Yen Haru conducted himself has ever been unprofitable. This person may be young, but he's a mercenary man who loves money very, very much. There is no business he doesn't dare to dip his fingers into. Lei Changming saved his life. There must be a reason that caused them to fall out with one another. Shun Zichuan recalled the incident regarding the lawful grandson of the Shao clan and asked in passing. Throughout the journey here, Luo had been going all out to ingratiate himself with Shun Zichuan for fear that Shun Zichuan would kill him off once he outlived his usefulness. He immediately weighed up the stakes and sold Lei Changming out. Lei Changming had an addiction, and it grew progressively worse in recent years. The commoners in the two prefectures of Dunjo and Duanzhou were very much afraid and did not dare to keep their children at home around for fear that we would carry them off and give them to Lei Changming. At first, Lei Changming kept the Yen clan in the dark and did not dare to bring it up. But later, he asked the brothels in Fanzhou for some young ones, and the children the procuress came over to deliver were recorded in the pawnshop as rice flour. This was uncovered by the Yen clan's audits, and young Master Yen flew into a terrible rage. Lei Changming promised Yen Haru that he would turn over a new leaf, but how could he change something like this? With Kai Yu fanning the flames on his end, it didn't take long for them to fall out for real. Yen Haru cut off the monthly funds to Mount Luo, and grains stopped heading our way. Having said to this point, Luo faced the carriage curtain. It was because of this that we were starving so badly on Mount Luo. Lei Jingzhe had Lei Changming demand grains from Cizhou. Zhou Gui had no troops and power then, and he gave in time and time again. It just so happened that the emperor in Kudu passed away. When the Marquis rebelled, the uncle and nephew pair plotted to use Han Jin to exchange for noble titles. In any case, no one's keeping Zhongbua under control. If it really worked out and they get conferred with the title of a prince or something, then we would transform into a regular local army. Shun Zichuan tapped with his fingertips and said, Lei Jingzhe is truly a good child. Lei Jingzhe was the brains behind Lei Changming. How could he have let Lei Changming take a tumble over such a simple matter like Fanzhou's delivery of children? It was because the Yen clan cut off Lei Changming's monthly funds that Lei Changming would turn his main forces on Cizhou. He marched his troops to Cizhou in such an ostentatious display and ended up being targeted and killed by Xiao Qie and Shun Zichuan. He was indeed a target set up to be a scapegoat. In all probability, Lei Jingzhe had long wanted to usurp and take over his position. They might have gone to Han Qing in an attempt to exchange for noble titles, but Han Qing might not necessarily be willing to acquiesce to both men's presumptuous demands. Throw in Lei Changming's insatiable greed into the mix, and it remained to be seen whether they could even reach an agreement. So, Lei Jingzhe took Lei Changming, his kin-maternal uncle, out of the equation and let him die conveniently in the strife without ever tying himself directly to it. This suggested two possibilities. The first was that Han Qing was not a scorpion, and the scorpions were far less capable than Shen Zichuan feared. The second was that they were all pawns and did not need to mutually know each other, they just had to stay in their place and do what they ought to do to complete the mission. Shen Zichuan had his own theory regarding both of these conjectures. He lost himself in his thoughts and did not speak again. It was already the hour of high when the horse carriage entered the city, and as its name suggested, Tongming Pawn Shop was indeed brightly lit. Fei Xing brought Lure along to register themselves and saw horse carriages of all styles and colors outside the pawnshop. There were the Longyu merchants that had come around from Jueshi as well as human traffickers from Fanzhou. A hubbub of abacus beads being flicked and all sorts of shouts filled the place, where every imaginable ware was on sale. It was already such a late hour, and yet the place was still bustling with activity. As the hub, Tongming Pawn Shop sat in the center with large lanterns hung up on both sides of it. Wine taverns and stores operated all night, with the hustle and bustle keeping up until dawn. There were plenty of beggars, but they were all being bossed around. Prostitutes of all ages drew close to the coming and going wealthy men and pulled them to the inns so that they had a place to sleep for free for a night, relying on this to earn some money for food. Amidst the surge of crowd, Fei Xing noticed a few Biantia faces. This place did not seem to have been once defeated in war. The stench of wine and meat gone sour permeated the air along with the fragrance of perfumes and spices from Jueshi and the Chashi River. They jostled against one another for prominence, subsequently turning into a fusion of smells that made one's knees weak. This street was like a Milky Way reflected from the vault of heavens that converged the remaining bright lights in Zhongbo together, making the surroundings look pitch dark in comparison. There were so many people around that Fei Xing did not dare to be too conceited and careless. Armed with the tips Lure had given, he headed inside the pawnshop and looked around for someone to submit his registration. The goods were miscellaneous grains from Huaizhou. The store clerk busily and methodically checked them one at a time according to the sequence of the hanging tag. He moved quickly, and the younger assistant following behind him was even quicker in noting it all down. When the shop clerk came before the horse carriage, he did not presumptuously reach out to lift the curtains, but bowed at it in all earnestness. You sirs come from the West and are all-powerful connoisseurs of the trade, and since you have made your way to our dojo, we dare not be poor hosts, so we will just lay it all out here first. You must be fatigued from the journey, so treat it as some entertainment tidbits to relieve your boredom. Shen Zichuan did not answer. This shop clerk had seen his fair share of traveling merchants, and he had prior dealings with both magnates and bandits before, so he knew that some of these customers had terrible tempers. He remained firmly on his feet with a neutral expression and said, "Once you have entered the city, it's all entirely up to you whoever you decide to have business dealings with. No one can interfere, for it's nobody else's business. As fleeting as our encounters are, we are all fellow travelers whose paths have crossed. Our coming here for the same purpose makes us acquaintances who should mutually get along and help each other. Dunjo is remote and out of the way, so let's all look out for one another. If you require mediation for any issues, feel free to send someone to the shop to let us know. No matter where these people are from, the assistants will always be standing ready to assist without delay as long as you so command. However, there is one rule that must be made clear to you. Any goods that are meant for purchase and sales have to be recorded down on file in the shop, and every good on record in the shop has to be a genuine product. By having yourself registered for business in our shop, you can be considered as having received the nod from the Yen clan. In Dunjo we share prestige and wealth together." After the shop clerk was done speaking, he bowed once more to the horse carriage, then turned aside and lifted his arm to guide them. "A courtyard has been especially prepared in the back for you. Please choose the attendants as you please. We have all kinds of fresh, seasonal fruits available for your enjoyment. As long as you stay in Dunjo, you can ask for anything you would like to eat or enjoy. Our Yen clan will take care of it all for you." Fei Xing was secretly rendered speechless. The Shi clan was wealthy, but they were nowhere as generous as this. This Yen Haru was truly incredible. Rumor had it that he loved money as much as he treasured his life, but he also spent money like water. He was an ostentatious man who loved gold. He invested all of his capital into Dunjo and won over the hearts of all the traveling merchants. It was no wonder that the Shi clan's chain of shops could not make their foray into the market in the east at all. The shop clerk did not waste any more time on superfluous talk and shouted, "The 16th courtyard of Tianji welcomes its distinguished guests." The horse carriage started moving with a rumble, guided into the courtyard by a specially deployed errand runner. With his face to the carriage window, Shen Zichuan heard the melody that drifted from the upper floors of the wine tavern in the darkness. The dazzling display of lanterns in a kaleidoscope of colors through the carriage drapes looked like multicolored waves of shimmering water so gorgeous that one was left mesmerized and captivated. The moment Luer entered the courtyard, he clicked his tongue in wonder. He took his shoes off before stepping on the porch and held them in his bosom as he followed behind Fei Xing and cast glances all around. He thought out loud, "Hot damn, just how much silver would you need to spend on all these?" Fei Xing took a look at the hallway. "Not unless you have 1,000,000 to splurge." Luer had never before seen this much money, and neither had Fei Xing. It had to be known that during the reign of Xianda, the military budget allocated to Libei and Qidong totaled to merely 2,000,000 top. The imperial court officials had to reduce their salaries and scrimp and save to provide for the Libei armored cavalry and Qidong garrison troop. The imperial court was so ridiculously poor it was driving all of them insane, and yet here Yen Haru was, splurging hundreds of thousands of taels at a mere wave of his hand, all just for the sake of entertaining his guests. The journey had truly been difficult. Fei Xing did not dare to make Shen Zichuan endure it for any longer and attended to him as he drank the medicine. He then called for a subordinate to prepare water and make the bed. He did not dare to urge Shen Zichuan to take a rest, and so he quietly instructed Ding Tao to do so. Fei Xing did not call for any of the attendants from the Yen clan to serve in the yard. The courtyard was guarded by rank after rank of imperial bodyguards, with Fei Xing staying in the innermost layer to stand guard under the eaves of Shen Zichuan's room. Not only were the imperial bodyguards on guard duty on the ground, but they were also stationed on the ridge of the upturned eaves. Ding Tao, having slept his fill in the carriage during the daytime, was now sitting up there writing and drawing with Li Xiong. The words that Xiao Qia had said before they had set off would pop up from time to time in Fei Xing's mind, so much so that Fei Xing's heart would leap into his mouth if Shen Zichuan so much as let out a cough in the night. Shen Zichuan was not familiar with Dunjo, yet for some reason, the nightmares hit him hard that night. Chaucer's sinkhole had disappeared, and the Prince of Jianxing's manor had replaced it in its place. The deaf and mute auntie sat under those dark and gloomy eaves, while Shen Zichuan stood in the dimly lit room, feeling thirsty. As the table was so very tall, he stood on tiptoe to reach for the teacup, but ended up brushing it onto the ground. Broken fragments of porcelain that had shattered by his foot went flying all over, cutting his finger. Shen Zichuan started to sob. He felt inexplicably upset, as if he had broken something precious. But no matter how much Shen Zichuan sobbed, the auntie merely continued to focus on her embroidery with her back to him. She extended her arm and pressed it down, which subsequently elongated her shadow all the way to Shen Zichuan's foot and turned it into a grotesque, long-limbed creature. She repeated this one action over and over again, her surroundings shrouded in dead silence. Shen Zichuan's finger was burning with searing pain. He clutched his robes in his anxiety and bandaged the wounded finger. Blood very quickly bloomed through his robe, like a camellia that had broken apart upon falling onto the snowfield, red and vivid. Chapter 170, Creature. Chapter 170. Creature. The two fingers on Shen Zichuan's right hands trembled violently, the blazing pain jolting him awake in a split second. He wearily raised his right arm and spread his palm open, only to realize that he could not move his two fingers freely. The window paper glowed indistinctly with light. To think he had slept until this hour. Shen Zichuan set down his arm and let the sweat trickle down along his temples. After a moment, he rolled over and got up, his two fingers slightly curled as he put on his clothes. On hearing the sound of movements, Fei Xing turned back and beckoned to the subordinate bearing the medicine to come over and attend to Shen Zichuan. The door opened, and Fei Xing lifted the hem of his robe and strode in. Shen Zichuan was standing and washing up by the copper basin. "Master." Fei Xing went around to the side and said softly, "We called for a physician early in the morning. He's waiting out there. Shall we summon him in to take a look?" Shen Zichuan placed the handkerchief back into the basin and, in a rare moment in which he did not refute him, said, "Call him in." Delighted, Fei Xing immediately shouted for the physician. In the interim, he said to Shen Zichuan, "We released the men last night." With Luer's connections with his old acquaintances, the news came in pretty fast. "Master, Lei Jingzhe is right here in the city." Shen Zichuan stood by the door and looked back pensively at Fei Xing. The fact that Lei Jingzhe reacted so quickly illustrated that they had committed the transportation route of the military supply firmly to mind, with even the possibility of a delay taken into account. Thus, Lei Jingzhe immediately headed down to Dunzhou when the squad did not arrive these couple of days. It was likely that he wanted to get to the bottom of who had robbed the scorpions. The military supply wagons to Cizhou have the Libei armored cavalry keeping watch over them along the way. The news can't have spread that fast. They should have entered Cizhou by now. Whether or not Lei Jingzhe can get to the bottom of the matter, the stuff and men are ours now. Fei Xing stepped aside and watched as Shen Zichuan drank his medicine. But it's too tough to catch Lei Jingzhe alive in the city. "Master, there are still 400 scorpions watching over the bandits they took captive, and these men could also be considered as Lei Jingzhe's soldiers. Our numbers are far too low." The medicine was so bitter it put a slight frown on Shen Zichuan's face. To date, Lei Jingzhe still has yet to put Mount Luo and Duanzhou in order. This indicates that he doesn't have enough soldiers under his command to deploy. He likely smuggled the armaments to ingratiate himself with Bianxia. So, the 400 scorpions in the city of Dunzhou might not necessarily be willing to listen to his orders. Besides, we came to Dunzhou to make money on amicable terms, not to seize what's others by force. We can take our time. He handed the empty bowl to Fei Xing. "Cizhou has nothing of importance to attend to lately. I have all the time in the world to have my fun with him." When Fei Xing took the bowl, he saw Shen Zichuan's hand dangling from the opening of his sleeve. The color drained from his face, and he lifted the hem of his robe and kneeled. "That hand's broken, isn't it, master? We were in such a rush during our journey. I'm really blind. To think I never. Time was of the essence then, and it's not like we could find a decent physician midway into our journey." Seeing how panicked Fei Xing was, Shen Zichuan said, "It's just 2 fingers that are broken, not severed. Let the physician set them with steel needles and have them bandaged later. They'll be fine after half a year of healing." Shen Zichuan downplayed his injuries and responded in such a nonchalant manner, but listening to him filled Fei Xing with fear and trepidation. In an act of either genuine sentiment or feigned sincerity, Fei Xing's eyes reddened as he braced himself against the ground with his hands and said in a trembling voice, "When the master is wounded, his subject deserves death for letting it happen. It doesn't stand to reason for a guard to be right by his master's side and still let his master get injured. As he spoke, he raised a hand and slapped himself several times on the cheek. It's all because we are so useless that Master even has to come personally to our rescue. Master, I beseech Master to bestow our deserved punishments on us. Fei Xing was now leading the imperial bodyguards, and by kneeling here to slap himself without the slightest trace of hesitation, he was also effectively slapping the faces of those men outside. He was lowering himself to let everyone in here and out there understand that this incident was a wake-up call. Such an oversight could not be made ever again. Shen Zichuan must never get hurt. From the moment they arrived in Zhongbua after being forsaken by Han Qing and were rejected by Xiaoqie, Shen Zichuan was the only candidate left to be their master. Qiao Tianya had a knack for managing his subordinates too. In fact, he was even more well-liked by the subordinates than Fei Xing was, but he was much too uninhibited. At times, he seemed to treat Shen Zichuan more like a friend than a master. Fei Xing had already garnered much from Shen Zichuan's act of deploying Qiao Tianya over to Yao Wenyu's side. Could Yao Wenyu's body heal soon? If not, then Qiao Tianya would stay by Yao Wenyu's side for as long as several years. The vacated position beside Shen Zichuan was given to Fei Xing, which in Fei Xing's view was a hint that he had to accomplish what Qiao Tianya would not do while in the same position. He had to make it clear to the current imperial bodyguards that it was out of respect for Ji Gang that Shen Zichuan did not pursue their dereliction of duty. But they must never, ever repeat the same mistake again. As long as Shen Zichuan had not given the nod, Fei Xing would never take action. Likewise, as long as Shen Zichuan gave the command, good or bad, Fei Xing would execute it and see it through to the very end. He was far more aware of his own place than Qiao Tianya was. He was Shen Zichuan's guard, not Shen Zichuan's friend. As such, he would not privately report Shen Zichuan's injury to Xiaoqie. The imperial bodyguards followed suit and kneeled too, their faces burning with pain as they listened to the sounds of Fei Xing's slaps. Fei Xing smacked himself until his cheeks turned red, and even so, he was still lifting his hand for another slap when a folding fan suddenly intercepted his hand. There can be no progress without pain. As long as you don't repeat the same mistake, it's all right. Shen Zichuan shifted the fan in his left hand away. All the people in the courtyard are good men. Punishments will come to those who have done wrong. I naturally have my own arrangements for when we return to Cizhou. You may rise now. The fact that Shen Zichuan did not let Fei Xing continue to slap himself meant that he had no intention to humiliate them. He gave scholars their due respects, but he did not treat the imperial bodyguards shabbily either. Their monthly salaries were issued in a timely manner and converted to ready silver based on Kuda's standard, and the imperial bodyguards' residences were all spacious, well-lit rooms. What's more, there was Ji Gang to give them martial arts pointers at all times. At first, they all thought Shen Zichuan to be a capricious man who was a tough one to serve, but over time, they realized that Shen Zichuan was pretty much set in his preferences. He duly meted out rewards and punishments as needed, and his commands were all decisive and straightforward. There had never been an incident in which he took out his anger on his subordinates. Fei Xing wiped his tears and kowtowed a few more times to Shen Zichuan before rising to his feet and taking his position at the side. Ding Tao stared blankly at the scene unfolding before him and felt a great wave of guilt wash over him. The physician outside happened to arrive just then, so Fei Xing lifted the curtains and invited the physician in. Both of Shen Zichuan's fingers had indeed been broken, but they were fortunately not severed. As he expected, the physician had them set and secured with steel needles. With half a year of recuperation, they should be more or less healed. My lord should not wield a blade or draw a bow these days. The physician was an old man. As the fee they paid him was generous, he made a special point of giving further instructions when he got up. You've been putting off having this injury treated for quite a few days. Fortunately, you didn't delay it past today. Otherwise, it couldn't be set back into place even with the steel needles. My lord seems to me to be in poor health, and it's now coincidentally the 8th month where sudden fluctuations in weather temperature are a common occurrence. Pay more attention to your meals and attire. Don't fall ill again. The physician lifted his sleeves to pack his medical case when he remembered something else. Is my lord always having trouble sleeping? He said. Business has to be conducted, but it's taxing on the mind and body. No human will be able to take it if they keep getting haunted by nightmares over a long period of time. I'll get you a brocade pouch later and fill it with some incense to help you sleep. You can put it under your pillow at night and see if it works. Fei Xing bent over to help the physician carry his medical case and saw him out. Shun Zichuan sat on the chair and sized up his right hand in the momentary silence that followed. 2 of his fingers were bound together so securely that it proved inconvenient for him to stretch them. He could forget about grasping his blade now. It was really by a stroke of good fortune that they were not severed. But why would he dream of the prince of Jianxing's residence? Last night's dream played out on what seemed to be a yellowish worn-out rag, where only the back of the auntie was visible because Shun Zichuan no longer remembered how she looked. He cried so sadly for that cup of water, but had it been really for that cup of water? Shun Zichuan rested his elbow on the chair handle and leaned back slowly. His gaze shifted along the half-lowered bamboo blinds to the eaves shrouded under the shadow of a tree. He slowed the dream in his mind in an attempt to lay every scene out for deeper scrutiny. The deaf and mute auntie sat under the eaves. The courtyard was tiny, and the direction in which the house was facing was terrible. Once dusk fell, the interior would get dim rather quickly. Shun Zichuan was still short, so short that he did not have to bend over to look into the inner chamber. He wanted so much to drink that cup of water. His entire throat seemed to be on fire. But he could not reach it. Thus, he stood on tiptoe. Shun Zichuan tilted his head up slightly. He stood on tiptoe. This was not the first time this had happened. He knew it was possible that the teacup might fall onto the ground. So at the same time he stood on tiptoe, he looked inside. The inner chamber was too dark. The windows were all unopened, and that half-lowered beaded curtain was bereft of life. It remained still and unmoving, a tint of white in the darkness. Shun Zichuan frowned and continued to pry further as if in a trance. Why did he have to look in? The young Shun Zichuan stood on tiptoe and leaned over the edge of the table to look at that mass of darkness. He blinked several times and did not withdraw his gaze, but he could not help but reach his fingers out to touch the rim of the teacup. Someone stirred in the darkness, and at the moment his attention was diverted, Shun Zichuan accidentally brushed the teacup aside and dropped it. The sound of the teacup shattering was so crystal clear it was as if it had been smashed right beside his ear. It startled the person in the inner chamber into turning around. The strange shadow of the auntie who kept lifting her arm soundlessly grabbed Shun Zichuan by the foot, and it was at this very moment Shun Zichuan saw a terror-stricken face. Shun Zichuan suddenly sucked in a breath as he snapped back to his senses and found that he had subconsciously clenched his right hand into a fist. Intense pain throbbed in those 2 fingers. The weather was hot today, but Shun Zichuan's back was all drenched in a cold sweat. He had seen Shen Wei. Shen Wei's face that was all contorted with terror was so jarring on the eyes that it jolted Shun Zichuan to his feet. He irritably relaxed his right hand and faced the shadow of the tree under the eaves, but he could not recall exactly what Shen Wei had been doing. Why was Shen Wei so panic-stricken? The inner chamber was too dark. Shun Zichuan could not see a thing at all. Even Shen Wei's face seemed to be lodged in a thick black mass of shadows. He kept thinking back to it, but still made no progress. His memory seemed to have been stuck in time, frozen upon the frame of Shen Wei's face. Damn. Shun Zichuan knew how to restrain his irascibility firmly under an icy demeanor, but not this time. The abhorrence his expression exposed was a clear indicator that he was already standing on the brink of the precipice. He was just like a trapped beast as he shut his eyes in the sunlight, the sweat oozing from his temples. Blood oozed out from his cut finger, staining his robe. Once again, pale white juxtaposed with vivid red. The beaded curtain was clearly dead, but it swung violently as it came back to life again in the scenes that flashed by. The strange shadow grabbed hold of Shenzichuan, whose finger was still bleeding. Meanwhile, the auntie kept up with her never-ending embroidery as her arms stretched longer and longer until the expanding shadow mutated into a scorpion swinging its tail. Thud! Shenzichuan abruptly shifted his gaze over. Ding Tao's legs gave way, and he fell onto his but on the ground, looking as though he was looking at a stranger. All the hair on his body was standing on end. His candy tumbled out and rolled on the ground, where it bumped into Shenzichuan's snapped fan. Shenzichuan leaned over to pick up the candy off the ground and handed it to Ding Tao, but Ding Tao did not reach out for it. Instead, he shifted back a little in fear and trepidation to flee from Shenzichuan's shadow. Shenzichuan's throat bobbed. It was as if he was a demonic creature stripped of its skin to be thoroughly exposed under the stinging sunlight. The pale sides of his neck revealed his vulnerability, and as the wind huffed at his sleeves, he let loose a laugh into the long, endless stillness and gently tossed the candy away. Chapter 171. Tattoo. Chapter 171. Tattoo. Ding Tao was petrified. In that instant when their eyes met, he thought that he would die like Jida had. He could still remember the expression in Shenzichuan's eyes when the latter killed Jida, and the same expression had been in those eyes as they locked on him just a moment ago. He wanted nothing more than to run, and when Shenzichuan handed him the candy, he lost the courage to raise his arm. It was silent under the eaves. Shenzichuan had already retreated back into the room. The harsh sunlight blazed upon Ding Tao's frame. He had yet to recover his wits. That kind of feeling was indescribable, but one thing was for sure. This was not the young master he was familiar with. Ding Tao lifted both arms and wiped haphazardly at his eyes. He wanted to pick up the candy, but it had long melted from the heat of the sun. The delicate sweetness of osmanthus attracted a colony of ants. Ding Tao remained kneeling in place. He did not know why, but the tears had begun to pitter-patter down from his eyes. Shenzichuan's interrupted memories could no longer be strung together into a coherent whole. It had been too dark in the dream. He simply could not remember any more details. He stood behind the bamboo blinds and heard Ding Tao sobbing beneath the eaves. Shenzichuan told himself, he must not dwell too deeply on this dream. He had to sieve the truth from falsehood as soon as possible and decipher if the contents of this dream were real scenes he had genuinely seen before or if they had been a figment of his imagination. For 6 years, he had been subjected to the compulsion of nightmares. He knew best that such dreams were sometimes a mixed bag of reality and fiction. It was just like how he used to dream of the Chaucer sinkhole in the past, although the sight that greeted him in the sinkhole would change according to his state of mind. After Shenzichuan had gotten injured during his trip to Chaozhou, he dreamed of himself lying in the sinkhole. That was the prelude to his mistrust of his own body and his realization that he had begun to fear death. Frequent nightmares could mess with memories, and in truth, Shenzichuan could no longer be certain of the words that Ji Mu had said to him before his death. How dangerous! Shenzichuan thought self-deprecatingly to himself. It was just one Shenwei. Lure's network of connections came in very handy. They hid all over the city in every street and alley, and as long as they were paid enough, they could become eyes of varying sizes. By capitalizing on these informants, Fei Xing could snoop into every nook and cranny of Dunzhou without even stepping foot outside. However, Lei Jingzha's movements were intriguing, to say the least. Lei Jingzha has been brazenly carrying out his search for 3 consecutive days. He's checked through all the goods entering and exiting. Fei Xing said in a hushed tone behind Shenzichuan. Master, could it be that he already knows that we're in the city? Shenzichuan was wearing a Zhejiang hat, one that was common in Kutik. If that's the case, He should be checking the wagons and carriages of the merchants coming and going rather than the goods themselves. This batch of military supplies was very important to Lei Jingzhe, otherwise, he would not have promptly rushed over to Dunzhou to check on it personally. Based on Shen Zichuan's guess, Lei Jingzhe wanted to exchange this batch of supplies for something else of equivalent value from the 12 tribes of Bianxia. Yet, he did not search to the west immediately when he arrived in Dunzhou. Instead, he wandered around the city of Dunzhou. Shen Zichuan lifted his arms to lean over the edge of the railing and surveyed the restaurant from top to bottom through the sheer fabric. He took his time organizing his thoughts, then said, "Checking the goods shows that Lei Jingzhe thinks those supply wagons will still return to Dunzhou. How strange." Shen Zichuan tapped his fingertips on the railing. How could Lei Jingzhe be so sure that the supply wagons would return to Dunzhou? The numbers of powers in Zhongbua who could devour this batch of provisions were few and far between. Xizhou was one of the primary suspects. Shen Zichuan was even prepared to challenge Lei Jingzhe openly, but as it turned out, Lei Jingzhe had not suspected him at all. "Master, even if Lei Jingzhe thought someone else robbed the supplies, who would resend them back to Dunzhou? Fei Xing could make neither head nor tail of it. There are still scorpions stationed here. Transporting the supplies back would be walking right into the trap." "You're right." Shen Zichuan, who had been having difficulty sleeping these days, wearily massaged the center of his brows. Who in the world would rob the goods and send them back later? This made no sense at all. The informants we have successively planted in Dunzhou turned out to be of no use precisely because it's too chaotic over here. Fei Xing plucked up his courage and said, "Could it be a bandit who is unwilling to defect to the Bianxia people scheming against Lei Jingzhe?" Shen Zichuan thought about it carefully and gave a slight shake of his head. After the split of the Mount Luo bandits, there has never been a leader who could win over the masses. Ding Niu and Luo were taken captive because they never thought of joining forces to oppose Lei Jingzhe. It's possible for them to be small-time bandits based on their current size, but they would never have the courage to lay their hands on such a big batch of supplies. Military armament was not like other things. They could not be taken apart and hidden like grains. Given that this batch of supply wagons required hundreds of bandits to push it, it was easy to imagine just how heavy it was. Those small-time bandits could not have swallowed it at all. Shen Zichuan's ability to transfer them hinged on the fact that he did not kill off that batch of bandits, along with the fact there was also the Libei armored cavalry tagging along to hold the bandits in check. Otherwise, he would not have easily gotten his hands on this batch of stuff. This matter was so bizarre it was a little ludicrous. Fei Xing did not dare to laugh. He thought about it for a moment. If only Mr. Chingfeng or Yuanzhuo were here, he would not have needed to speak up. But there was no one beside Shen Zichuan at present, and Fei Xing would look like a blockhead if he just stood there without moving, so he thought hard about it for a moment and said, "Could it be?" A sudden stir of commotion downstairs cut off Fei Xing's words. Shen Zichuan lifted the veil of his hat and squinted his eyes at the main hall. Being on the 5th floor, they had a full view of the situation in the main hall. This restaurant belonged to the Yan clan. Shen Zichuan was here because Lei Jingzhe would be here tonight to entertain a certain someone. The identity of said person was unknown for the time being. His informants were not good enough to pull off that level of information, but Shen Zichuan more or less had a guess who it was. "The scorpions." Fei Xing lowered his voice. "Lei Jingzhe brought the scorpions." Shen Zichuan looked down at Lei Jingzhe. The latter had just recovered from his injuries, and his hair had been cropped short. One could hardly distinguish him from the Bianxia scorpions crowding around him. Due to the distance, Shen Zichuan was unable to get a clear look at the tattoo on Lei Jingzhe's nape. Lei Jingzhe apparently had matters to attend to. He stepped across the hall and hurried up the stairs. "If he's here for the feast," Fei Xing slowly furrowed his brow, "then that's quite the number of people he has brought along with him, isn't it?" There were plenty of merchants in this building, but no one dared to stand in Lei Jingzhe's way. He had indeed brought a lot of men with him, There were at least 30 of them. A few of them followed him up the stairs while the rest took their seats in the main hall. The imperial bodyguards in their various disguises kept their composure and watched Lei Jingzhe as they drank, made merry, and even brushed past him. Shen Zichuan picked his teacup up and watched Lei Jingzhe head up the 5th floor to the area across from him. He sipped his tea and said, "When you get back, give Luer some monetary reward for his accuracy in pinpointing the location." Fei Xing acknowledged the order. The party on the opposite end lowered the bamboo blinds to keep out prying eyes. The few men Lei Jingzhe brought along stood guard outside. Fei Xing, who had great eyesight, carefully searched for the scorpion tattoos on these men's bodies with the help of the lit lanterns. A little less than an hour later, the lanterns in the building were all raised. The party on the other side called for their food to be served, and waiters weaved in and out of the area. Fei Xing attempted to shift his position, but the screen at the other end had been so cleverly erected that he could not find the chance to snoop. Lei Jingzhe's feast stretched on for a very long time from the hour of Yu to the hour of Hai, and they still had yet to call it a day. Shen Zichuan had already finished an entire pot of tea and was leaning sleepily against his chair. Another 2 hours passed, and the vibrancy in the atmosphere in the building turned up a notch instead of evaporating. "It's the Yen clan's show now," Fei Xing reminded Shen Zichuan in a whisper. "Master, this is a signal for the various merchants to have fun among themselves." Shen Zichuan breathed an acknowledgement and tiredly opened his eyes to look downstairs for a while from his seemingly drab seat. "A free market it is. The Yen clan profits from playing the mediator between the various parties here. What they collect is privilege money. Tell them in a while to sell the grains we brought over as well." "Human traffickers." Fei Xing looked attentively at the people below. "That's the procuress from Fanzhou." The procuress of Fanzhou was a rotund, heavily made-up woman ostentatiously decked out in loud, showy apparel. When she came here in the past, it was for the specific purpose of bringing children for Lei Changming. She had never carried out any transactions with the other merchants. But her business in Dunzhou was impeded when the Yen clan fell out with Lei Changming, so she reluctantly switched to selling women, whom she took in from the various prefectures in Zhongbua. In those few years where the starvation among the people was at its worst, a dough of grains could be exchanged for an entire family of young and old. "Master." Fei Xing half bent over and began to introduce in detail. "This procuress's name is Cuiching. We dug into her background in passing while we were monitoring the prices of commodities in Fanzhou. She and Lei Changming have a shared past. She was initially a native of Duanzhou, and before the defeat of the Zhongbua's troops, she worked as a procuress too. Later, she went to Fanzhou and continued to ply her old trade there. Lei Changming was the one who forked out the deposit. That was why she was willing to take the risk and deliver the children to Lei Changming." Grasping her handkerchief in hand, Cuiching twisted her body to squeeze through the group of merchants. No one dared to take advantage of her in this place. On the contrary, however, she would think of ways to get her hands on whoever she occasionally took a fancy to. As an old-timer in the 3 prefectures of Dunzhou, Duanzhou, and Fanzhou who had dabbled for a long time in the trade, she had some involvement with Lei Changming and Kaiyu, although she had yet to board a big ship like the Yen clan. Cuiching was so obese that she squeezed a few men out of the way when she sat down. She crossed her legs and reclined against the side of the table. The fair-faced man following behind her kneeled to light her pipe for her. She tilted her head to suck in a few mouthfuls, then blew out puffs of smoke. "My eldest nephew hasn't come down yet?" Cuiching cast a few glances up. "They are taking such a long time. He should have been done by now even if he was messing under the sheets, let alone having a meal." The merchant sitting by her side said, "What good stuff has the madam brought along this time? Take them out while you can and show them to us. We'd be keen too if there's one suitable." "Bah!" Cuiching examined the gold and jade bracelets on her right hand. "Are you even worthy of the good stuff? The ones we brought along this time are not salacious goods worth a mere few dozens of silvers. Those are all young virgins in the prime of their youth. In Kudu you can forget about taking them away without at least a few hundred taels. How is a virgin worth this sum? Whores are all temptresses, so it's only natural for them to be more expensive the more seasoned they are. You guys are only worthy of fooling around in those lousy brothels. Suiching stroked the fair-faced man's cheeks with her manicured finger that had been painted with nail polish and cackled. Back in the old days when Duanzhou was still the money spinner of Dazhou, all the girls in my stable were unrivaled beauties. Which of the cheap sluts from other brothels has even been able to beat my girls in all the years the establishment has been ranking them? Suiching generally did not bring up the past given how pathetically she had fled during the defeat of the Zhongguo's troops, but the atmosphere was great tonight, with flattery freely thrown around left and right. She smoked her pipe, looking very pleased with herself as the others clustered around her. Not to boast of my high standards, but if it had been in the past, the goods I brought along today would only be worthy enough to serve tea in my establishment. The rouge on Suiching's lips was bright red, and her thick makeup concealed much of her wrinkles. From the contours of her face, it was visibly apparent that this one had also been a great beauty several decades back. "Come on, give us names." With a contemptuous smile, Suiching said, "The top 3 in the ranks were all girls from my establishment, and each one of them married well. Today, prostitutes and performers are inseparable from one another, too, but back then, they were as different as the waters of the Jing and Wei rivers. 3 all of you have to spend gold just to catch a glimpse of those who sell their arts, and they can simply refuse to see you when they were in business. They were even more precious than the young missies from rich, prominent families. My eldest nephew's mother was also a girl of mine, the famous Xiaoyinli IV of the Chaosha Riverside, who married into the Zhu clan in Duanzhou." As Suiching spoke, she pinched the man's face and blew smoke into his face. These were all small potatoes. The one I doted on the most was the number 1 in the establishment. Ever heard of pure as white jade, as if made of porcelain? Back then, just putting up her name alone would have the whole city of Duanzhou turning up in full force. Even the emperor himself, who was far away in Kudu, wanted a glimpse of her ravishing appearance. The surrounding merchants clapped their hands and said in delight, "That's Bai Cha." Under the spiraling wisps of smoke, an entranced Suiching put up her hand, looking as if she was still reveling in her past as she snorted and murmured, "Bai Cha, do you people really think pure as white jade is a fabrication?" She was what it truly meant to be like jade and porcelain. If all of you were to see her, I'm sure all of you would no doubt kneel down to be her footrest if she so much as furrowed her brows. No one could bear to let her get sullied by the dust on the ground. The hall reeked of smoke so thick that several courtesans who were sitting with them coughed. But girls like them who earn a living by prostituting themselves did not dare to cover their noses and mouths for fear that the patrons beside them thought that they were being disdained, so every one of them held it in until their powdered cheeks flushed red as they remained squeezed in the middle, all drenched in sweat. Suiching got someone to set up the cards with the intention to play a couple of games that were all the rage in Kudu. The handsome man she brought along remained kneeling by the side to massage her legs. Not a few moments later, one of the courtesans simply could not stand it any more and knitted her brows as she covered her mouth with a handkerchief and let out a light cough. The smell seemed off to her, so she took a couple more sniffs, then jerked to her feet with a cry of surprise and exclaimed, "Fire!" The merchants and courtesans in the hall instantly panicked. Everyone watched as billows of smoke rose. Those few attendants who had been serving them had long died. Cries of alarm echoed from all directions as everyone swept up the silvers in a fluster and tucked the money into their bosoms, without even knowing if the money was even rightfully theirs. The cards had fallen and scattered all over the ground. Suiching, being too obese, tottered on her feet from being jostled against. Even the hairpiece by her temple had fallen out. "Open the door!" Those who had made it to the door first pounded on it, shouting, "Why is the door locked?" Tables and chairs tipped over. Some people even attempted to climb out of the windows, but the windows were sealed too. Lei Jingzhe abruptly popped his head out and looked down. When Suiqing saw him, she quickly waved a handkerchief at him and shouted, "My dear nephew! Hurry up and think of a way to open the door. The back hall is on fire." Fei Xing's hand was already on the hilt of his blade. All it took was for Shen Zichuan to give the command, and the imperial bodyguards would immediately swarm the building. But Shen Zichuan continued to drink his tea without saying a word. Fei Xing could not help but call out, "Master." As Fei Xing spoke, a hand suddenly grabbed onto the railing in front of Lei Jingzhe, and from there, a man heaved himself up and leaped over. Lei Jingzhe's countenance instantly changed. He moved backward to dodge the other party's incoming scimitar and ended up knocking the screen over with a loud crash, exposing the table and chairs in the middle. To their surprise, there was only Lei Jingzhe himself. Fei Xing blurted out in shock, "He didn't invite anyone at all. This was a bait meant to lure a snake out of its hole." Shen Zichuan felt for his folding fan, but belatedly remembered that he had broken it. He drained the tea and watched the men that Lei Jingzhe had left downstairs rush up the stairs. Oddly enough, other than the area Lei Jingzhe was in, the rest of the place was very quiet. Fei Xing, with his sharp eyes, suddenly stuck his head out and stared fixedly at the fight across them. He watched them carefully without missing a single of their moves and exclaimed in bewilderment, "Master, this man is also a scorpion." The man who came to assassinate Lei Jingzhe had, in the thick of the action, inadvertently exposed the side of his neck, where a tattoo of an impressive scorpion identical to Jida's was inked. Chapter 172, HRU. Chapter 172. Haru Fei Xing subconsciously thought. They were already fighting tooth and nail on the other side. Lei Jingzhe's old injuries had yet to heal, and he was presently having difficulty parrying the other man's savage attacks. All he could do was to keep dodging. In the midst of blows being traded by the two opposing teams of scorpions in the cramped private room, Shen Zichuan saw scimitars and pike daggers. Fei Xing was itching to take action. He wanted to make up for the humiliation suffered earlier today and reclaim the dignity of the imperial bodyguards who had been making mistakes after mistake. Heaven did not fail him. It arranged such a dog-eat-dog scene to give him a helping hand. He drew out his Xiuquan blade and said, "Master, let's take this opportunity to take down Lei Jingzhe and put him on trial." "What's the hurry?" Shen Zichuan said at his own pace. "They're giving us a monkey show." Fei Xing originally did not understand, but he saw how nervous Lei Jingzhe looked, and the latter did not seem like the person who planned this. Both sides were equal in numbers, and the sound of things shattering during their fight persisted as glazed lamps and jade vases were smashed to pieces. He observed carefully and noticed that Lei Jingzhe was already showing signs of intention to retreat. It was pandemonium downstairs, but after the thick smoke dispersed, all was still and quiet again. The lanterns were raised as usual, with huge, glazed palace lanterns of various dazzling patterns hanging in the center of the main hall. The dead maidservants and attendants were all disposed of, and even the bloodstains on the ground were wiped clean. With a lift of the curtain at the back, a new batch of maidservants came pouring in bearing trays in their hands. They picked up those overturned tables and chairs and pulled the various merchants back into position with smiles and chatters. A bronze gong once suddenly sounded, and the attendant they had initially seen in the pawnshop stepped onto the stage in his new robe. He struck the gong he was carrying in his hand a few more times and announced in a loud, clear voice, "Mount Luo's chief of bandits, Lei Jingzhe vs. Duanzhou's little scorpion Harigu. Tonight, when martial arts expert meets martial arts expert, who will live and who will die? Gentlemen, place your bets." Fei Xing did not expect such a turn in the course of events. Even though he was used to seeing all kinds of unpredictable and tumultuous situations in Kudu, he still blurted out in shock, "They are betting on lives?" The bamboo blinds in the fifth-floor rooms were promptly lifted to reveal the wealthy merchants relaxing in their seats, drinking their tea, waving their fans and smoking their pipe. Lei Jingzhe wanted to leap out of the window to make his escape, only to realize that the window in particular had been nailed shut. "I've long heard that the young master of the Yan clan doesn't do anything that doesn't profit him," Shen Zichuan said. "To think he could do such roaring business too when it comes to such a trade." The screen in the private room was cleared aside, and the swift sounds of abacus beads being flicked rang out like the pelting of rain. The other man grinned. Men flock together and part ways for the sake of their own interests. Two even blood brothers still have to settle their accounts clearly. One ought to make the most of things at their disposal. Having said that, he stopped what he was doing and hold on to the windows to poke his head over and give Fei Xing the once-over. He winked at Shen Zichuan and said with a smile, "It's not easy to find an imperial bodyguard. This gentleman seems to me to be dignified in appearance and of the right stature. I can take him to Madame Tsueching later as an apology. My lordship, sell him to me, will you?" On hearing him point out Shen Zichuan's identity with just one sentence, Fei Xing could not help but tighten his grip on his blade and stand before Shen Zichuan to shield him. This man was 3 or 4 years older than Ding Tao. He had a childish air about him, and he was fair-skinned and exquisite-looking, with eyes that seemed to be soaked in honey. He looked particularly likable. Lei Jingzhe, who was on the opposite end, saw him and flew into a rage. Holding himself back with great difficulty, he said, "Why did the young master deceive me? You'd rather offend Gedale for the sake of a couple of scorpions?" Gedale is far away on the eastern side of the Chashi River. Yen Haru retracted his head and said, "Your maternal uncle owes me 580,000 taels of silver, while you owe me 340,000 taels of silver. Isn't it only right and proper for you to pay off your debts?" Lei Jingzhe snapped the chair's leg broken, and did his utmost to dodge the sudden glint from the blade. He suffered a setback in Xiao Qia's hands the last time and had to rely on Li Xiong to escape by the skin of his teeth, and now he found himself encircled once again, except this time he had played right into the hands of his own people. Yen Haru leaned over the railings and swung his legs as he watched Lei Jingzhe fight for his life. He shouted towards those downstairs, "A battle between formidable foes of equal strength is a rare sight to behold, so put up your names to register yourselves and take your hands off after placing your bets. Double your profit if you win, and if you make a loss, treat it as post-meal entertainment. As long as you're in Dunjo, I, Yen Haru, will not let anyone walk out of here a broke man without even a pair of pants to cover his ass." Lei Jingzhe was trapped in a deadly battle for his life. He had only brought along 30 men because he had been a fool to believe Yen Haru's lies. Now that Lei Jingzhe had the support of the Biancha cavalry along with 400 scorpions stationed in Dunjo, Yen Haru would have to show him due respect as long as he still intended to run his business in the east. But for all his machinations, Lei Jingzhe had never expected Shen Zichuan to be the person who had seized the military supplies. The iron cage in the hall was already up by now. Both Lei Jingzhe and the scorpions in the other camp had suffered heavy casualties, with more than half of their men wounded and dead. Lei Jingzhe spoke to the man that had come to assassinate him in Biancha tongue. "Harigu, we are all brothers from Gedale, so why fight each other to the death here? Join forces with me to get out of this predicament tonight, and I will not pursue what happened to that batch of military supplies." But the other man did not respond and swept his seaweed-like hair back before pulling out his pike dagger to pounce on Lei Jingzhe. Yen Haru spoke as he poured the wine. "Is your lordship not curious how I knew you'd come? Lures informants all come with their own prices." Shen Zichuan peeled an orange and brought it to his mouth. "As long as the money is enough, any news can change hands and be resold." Yen Haru laughed again. "It sounds like I'm not smart enough when you put it this way, but I actually got an inkling right away. Huaizhou's miscellaneous grains other than rice and wheat to the east have all gone into Cizhou's granaries. There's no one else capable of taking them out in such large quantities other than you, Shen Zichuan. What a coincidence then, Shen Zichuan said, to be meeting you here. Don't be so modest, Yen Heru spoke. Your lordship is here to lie in wait for the opportunity to present itself, aren't you? I truly find it strange. How did you know that the person Lei Jingzhe invited tonight was me? Shen Zichuan finished up the orange before continuing. Lei Jingzhe's trip to Dunzhou this time to search through the goods surely offended all the merchants, yet the Yen clan didn't step forth to obstruct him. This suggests that both parties have been keeping each other in the loop. In that case, he would have to invite you over for a drink, wouldn't he? He can also seize the opportunity to mend his relationship with the Yen clan. What's not to like about that? For that purpose, he even went as far as to select a restaurant owned by the Yen clan as a show of sincerity to you. Delighted, Yen Heru commended, "You're so smart." Yen Heru placed his interests first and foremost in everything he did, yet he appeared to be especially innocent and naive as he held that heavy golden abacus in his bosom, looking all like a child god of wealth. If it weren't for him being adorned with gold and jade from head to toe, Fei Xing would never have been able to guess that he was the current head of the Yen clan had he been walking down a street. On the other side, Lei Jingzhe was already fatigued from the fight when he saw yet another wave of men rushing up from below. They were vastly outnumbered and trapped in this private room. Lei Jingzhe was unwilling to yield, and the scorpions in the back smashed the window panels with their elbows. The night breeze immediately drifted in from the outside. Lei Jingzhe did not make the first move. He merely watched as the scorpion who had created the opening stuck his head out, only to meet with calamity right in the face. In the blink of an eye, his head had been decapitated. Yen Heru grunted. "This is my restaurant. You leave when I tell you to leave, and you stay when I tell you to stay." It was teeming with people both inside and out. The circle of men surrounding Lei Jingzhe shrunk as they closed in on him. All the merchants at the foot of the building were men who acted depending on the individual in question. So when they saw that Lei Jingzhe was no longer in the position to turn the tables, they hurried to follow in Yen Heru's footsteps and place their bets against Lei Jingzhe. All of them were waiting for him to die. The atmosphere started to heat up with restlessness. Suiqing clutched at her handkerchief, not bashful in the slightest as she removed all the bracelets on her arms and bet it all on Harigu. She had long forgotten about her eldest nephew, Lei Jingzhe. Shen Zichuan abruptly asked, "Did you scheme to kill Lei Jingzhe because you knew I was in Dunzhou?" A bored stiff Yen Heru answered, "That's right. I have to go where the wind blows. The trade route between Huaizhou, Cizhou, and Chazhou is kind of interesting. There's even the Libei armored cavalry for added security, and you can get a ride up to the frontier trade market if you head up. Imagine if we join forces. The 3 territories in the northeast of Dazhou will be as good as ours, yes? I can keep a chokehold on Qidong's military provisions for you, and you can take me along for the ride. Each with our own needs." As he spoke, he switched his posture. "The way I see it, you are gunning for Kudu. You have a bright future full of limitless possibilities ahead of you." "So I see." Shen Zichuan rose to his feet and motioned for Fei Xing to get his cloak. "I." Yen Heru rocked his chair as he looked at the shadows and wondered in puzzlement. "The show isn't over yet, and the man has yet to be slaughtered, so why are you leaving already? Don't you want Lei Jingzhe's head?" Shen Zichuan secured his cloak and looked back. "There's no one to mind those 400 scorpions, is there?" Yen Heru answered, "Your lordship is here. Get your Cizhou garrison troops to annihilate them." "Then I'll have to apologize," Shen Zichuan said with a smile. "I brought only a dozen or so people with me." The words had only just left Shen Zichuan's mouth when the doors to the main hall suddenly crashed open. Yen Heru craned his neck for a look. Scorpions filled the area outside, and they had even taken out the last remaining head cart 3 in the armory. Lei Jingzhe leaped onto the railing and let loose a short whistle to signal the scorpions to attack. The men outside the building were all martial pugilists Yen Heru bought over with money, but pitting them against the scorpions who were specifically trained to fight battles with the Libe armored cavalry was no different from throwing an egg against a rock. In no time, their broadswords and daggers were all flung away by the hammers. A crash rang out from the private room as a chair overturned. Yen-Haru bunched up his robe and climbed to his feet with the golden abacus in his arms, intending to flee. The moment he opened the door, he bumped into Fei Xing. Fei Xing lifted him up by the back of his collar, and as both of his legs left the ground, Yen-Haru cried out, "What the hell? We're on the same side." Yen-Haru's guards tried to seize him back, but the imperial bodyguards had already risen with their blades drawn. Sun Zichuan said, "Let's leave together. We can get to know each other on the way." Unable to break free, Yen-Haru could only let Fei Xing carry him downstairs like a quail, although he did not forget to yell, "Haragu, we're leaving! Come on!" Chaos descended upon the hall once again. The Biantia scorpions did not give a damn about anything else and simply swung their hammers to smash anyone they came across. Suiqing watched as blood and brain matter spurted out of the head before her and splattered her all over. Rattled, she held onto the table for support and recalled the savagery of the Biantia cavalry as they massacred the city several years ago. She could not help but shriek as she scrambled backward in an attempt to dodge. "Eldest nephew, save me!" There was complete mayhem at the foot of the building, and the exit was completely blocked off. With Yen-Haru in tow, Fei Xing stopped on the third floor and kicked the window of the private room open before stuffing Yen-Haru out. Yen-Haru shut his eyes and yelled in the wind, "Stop! I'm your master!" The martial pugilists, who were still standing guard outside the building, hurriedly kept away their blades. The wind whistled past. Yen-Haru opened his eyes with some difficulty and said resentfully, "What the heck did you come here for when you didn't bring your troops?" Fei Xing said to Sun Zichuan, "Master, there is a shop down from this place, and our carriage lies across the street from it." The moment Yen-Haru heard it, he clung on to the window and shook his head hard. "I'm not going this way. I don't know martial arts." Sun Zichuan could not be bothered to waste his breath on him, and so with a lift of his leg, he kicked Yen-Haru down. Wind filled Yen-Haru's wide-open mouth as he plummeted down with his arms and legs flailing and watched himself plunging right towards the ground. The fabric tarp at the top of the shop suddenly sank from the weight, but it did not rip apart. With one hand lifting Yen-Haru, Fei Xing climbed the ledges of the building with an arm and swung in the air for an instant before leaping off with Yen-Haru and landing on his feet. The imperial bodyguards were all lithe and dexterous men, and this move did not take them much effort to execute. The moment Fei Xing landed, he tossed Yen-Haru to his subordinate, took 2 swift steps back, and shouted, "Master!" Sun Zichuan landed deftly on the eaves and stepped on Fei Xing's shoulder with help from the fabric tarp, before landing on the ground as well. All hell broke loose as the sound of slaughter in the building rose through the roof. Fei Xing did not dare to confront the scorpions head-on, so the moment Sun Zichuan was sent into the carriage, he waved his hand in a signal to retreat. The imperial bodyguards moved swiftly and drove into the busy streets in the blink of an eye. Lei Jingzhe pushed the windows open, but there was already no trace of Yen-Haru to be seen. He pounded his fist against the window in a fury and turned around to continue speaking in Biantia tongue, "Don't let these traitors go." It was silent all around when the horse carriage came to a stop. Yen-Haru clung close to the wall of the carriage, covering his chest with his hands as he pleaded, "If nothing else, we can talk it over, and the prices are all negotiable. My lordship, don't get mad." Sun Zichuan took off his Zhejiang hat and tossed it aside, then said to Fei Xing, who stood outside, "Lift the curtain." Fei Xing lifted the carriage's curtains, and a turbid smell immediately drifted out of the carriage. Fei Xing thought there was something wrong with this scent, and Yen-Haru followed up with a shy, embarrassed smile, "Whenever I get anxious, I'll feel like farting." The imperial bodyguards outside immediately started coughing. Sun Zichuan let loose a laugh, and Yen-Haru promptly felt a chill run down his spine. He pedaled his legs to squeeze against the wall of the carriage, and heard Shen Zichuan say in a gentle tone, "Strip him." My mother was right. Yen Haru was now anxious. Good-looking men are all beasts. Don't do this. I don't swing that way. Fei Xing held down the back of Yen Haru's head, and stripped him in no time, although he fortunately left his pair of pants untouched. The nights in the 8th month of Dunjo were chilly, and Yen Haru, being such a delicate and fair-skinned lad, was so freezing cold that his teeth chattered and caused him to stutter. Fei Xing said, "Master, there's no scorpion on him." Shen Zichuan slowly folded his arms and went straight to the point as he looked at Yen Haru. "What's your relationship to the scorpions?" Yen Haru rubbed his arm and blinked his pair of doe eyes hard. "Why are you asking me this? Your lordship, that's not right. You should be asking what your relationship to the scorpions is." Shen Zichuan's eyes were unfathomably deep as he asked, "What's my relationship to the scorpions?" After a few moments of silence in the carriage, Yen Haru answered innocently, "I have no idea." Shen Zichuan continued, "Fei Xing." Fei Xing reached out to drag Yen Haru out. On seeing this, Yen Haru started to struggle to get up. "I really don't know. Haragu, you tell him." A man tumbled out from behind the horse carriage and fell to the ground panting. It was the man who first attempted to assassinate Lei Jingzhe earlier. With his prominent nose and deep-set eyes, he had the distinct appearance of a Biancha native, but he had black hair and black eyes, and the contours of his face were much softer than Huhilu's and Hassan's. As he turned over, he revealed the scorpion tattoo at the side of his neck. Haragu was wounded. At the same time he covered his wound, he looked at Shen Zichuan behind the flashes of swords and answered in a low, deep voice, "Son of Gedale." Chapter 173, Black and Amp, White. Chapter 173, Black and Amp, White. This was the second time Shen Zichuan heard of Gedale. Gedale was located to the east of Chasha River, and it fell under the jurisdiction of Biancha's territory. It was initially the temporary site of residence for the Zhongbo bandit. Shen Zichuan was pretty sure he had never been there before. His understanding of Gedale was limited to the Bai Cha portrait that Li Xiong had once mentioned. Going by the way Haragu meant it, Shen Zichuan could also call himself a son of Zhongbo. "We are all sons of Gedale." Haragu stood up, his eyes alert as his gaze wandered among the imperial bodyguards. He lifted a hand gently and said, "We have a reason to sit down for a chat. My brother died on the battlefield." Shen Zichuan was unmoved. "Before you make yourself clear, we are enemies. Your enemy is the Biancha cavalry." Haragu tightened the bandage around his wound. "I'm the enemy of your enemy. We can be friends." "Sure, friend," Shen Zichuan said. "What do you want to talk to me about?" Haragu pursed his pale lips and paused for a moment before saying, "We can join forces to kill Lei Jingzhe." Moonlight streaked across the shadow of the carriage. Shen Zichuan's expression was cold and detached. He could not even be bothered to answer, but his meaning was clear. If Haragu continued to beat about the bush without explaining himself clearly, then he would not deign to give him any response. "I know that the Emperor of Dazhou is dead and that it's the Emperor's mother who is managing governmental affairs now. You were driven out of Kudu and then you fled back to Zhongbo. You want to exact revenge, and you hope you can stage a comeback." Haragu looked at Shen Zichuan with a complicated expression. "You are swallowing up Zhongbo right now." With his elbows propped on his knees, Shen Zichuan stuck his face out from the shadows and looked down from above at Haragu. "Your information is too detailed." Haragu kept his hands raised as though he was pacifying some kind of beast and said, "This is information I have to dig out if I am to survive in Zhongbo. Please do not take offense. You have already erected your own city walls in the west, and now you want to head east and take back Dunzhou, Duanzhou, and even the Chashire sinkhole. But Lei Jingzhe is standing in your way, and it will be very troublesome for you if you can't kill him." "Brother, I want to kill him too, so we can join forces." Shinzichuan raised a finger and pointed to the side of his neck. You both have the same tattoo. Because we are all sons of Gedale. Haragu repeated this phrase. Lei Jingzhe is a white scorpion. They are all men from Dajo who have defected to Amu. As Haragu spoke, he spread his upper garment open to reveal the scorpion tattoo on the side of his neck. I'm a black scorpion. Fei Xing observed it carefully and said, There's no difference at all between your tattoos. We don't tell each other apart by our tattoos. Haragu explained. The tattoos are just markers the Biantia people use to distinguish those from Gedale with the others. Gedale lies within Biantia's borders, and it falls under the control of the Liaoying tribe in its early days. Shinzichuan said. So what's the difference between you people and the Biantia people? If you understand the Liaoying tribe in its former times, then it will occur to you why we are being differentiated from the others. Haragu put on his clothes. Before the Liaoying tribe had Amur, they were eagle slaves from the various major tribes. The Gedale that was under their control was even more lowly. The bandits of Zhongbua did business in Gedale by selling women, and these women were very popular with the various major tribes. The noble Hanshi tribe, in particular, was very fond of women from Dajo. But they were besieged. Fei Xing tossed a water canteen to Haragu. These bandits ran rampant along the Chaosha River, and the women from decent families in Duanzhou suffered greatly. The Zhu clan, unable to deal with the disturbance, reported it to Shun Wei and requested for Dunzhou to deploy troops for assistance. The commander of the Dunzhou garrison troops, Tantai Long, promptly sent his troops to fight their way to Gedale and crush these bandits. But the respite was temporary. Haragu took the canteen. Those bandits had the protection of the Liaoying tribe. They threw in their lots with the Liaoying tribe and became the Liaoying tribe's slaves, but they were never respected. They became the lowest class of people among the 12 tribes of Biantia and continued to round up women for the people of Biantia. These women were sent to the various tribes, where they became exchangeable commodities. Tantai Long failed to eradicate the bandits completely, and it did not take long for them to return to Gedale, where they established their base. The children born to the women from Dajo were called Wumenjian. Haragu tugged at his black hair. That is, bastard in Dajo tongue. These bastards could not exist in the various major tribes. They would carve out a portion of the purebred cattle and sheep when they grew up. So, the various tribes drown them in the Chaosha River or throw them back to Gedale. Fei Xing, having been born of the Fei clan, was unable to comprehend the rationale behind this move. These children all carry the blood of the various tribes. Even if their mothers are not honorable enough, there's no need to go to the extent of drowning them, is there? Do you know Hassan? That's the son Amur truly acknowledged. The 12 tribes are different from Dajo. In the desert, women take charge of childbearing in the tribe and even the distribution of cattle and sheep. They are an indispensable aid to tribal survival and are capable of standing on an equal footing with men. It takes an honorable mother to decide the future direction of a child. Amur has so many sons, and there are plenty of smart ones among them, but the moment they were born, they all lost the qualification to fight for power with Hassan, and this is precisely because Hassan's mother is the most honored and respectable woman in the Hanshi tribe. Her role in Amur's formation of the elite forces in the north is indispensable. Haragu took a few sips of water. Bastards are unworthy of taking on the surnames of the tribes, and so we were branded with a tattoo along with the bandits. Shinzichuan made some inferences from the timeline and said, Since you are distinguished between black and white, then you must each have your own uses. You have to understand one thing first. The so-called scorpions is a form of address that came about after Amur's rise to prominence. Before Amur's time, Gedale was a place where the bastards lived together. It was only after the rise of Amur that Gedale was really put to use. White scorpions, with their appearance resembling those of Dajo, could infiltrate deep into Dajo. Haragu screwed the canteen shut and made a crawling motion with 2 fingers. They can penetrate deep within, and they have played their roles to unimaginable effect in the last 10 years or so. Meanwhile, the black scorpions are left behind in Gedale, where Amur gives us the best teachers to train us to be strong enough to stand up to the Libe armored cavalry. Mutual assistance between black and white, you were helping each other. Realization dawned on Shinzichuan. There are no iron mines in the desert. To equip yourselves with that kind of hammer, you'd have to steal it from Dajo. That's right. Haragu tossed the canteen back. The white scorpions secured equipment and grains for us from within Dajo. Other than those, there were military maps too. The military map of the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua, whose information did Amur act on 6 years ago when he attacked Zhongbua? Haragu spread his hands apart and said, I don't know. I wasn't involved. But I can tell you that Amur has countless inextricable links to Kudu. The defeat of the Zhongbua troops was merely a trial run to test the waters, and it proved to be remarkably effective. Libe was held in check, and the repercussions are still being felt a few years later with the subsequent disintegration of Dajo. Fei Xing inwardly drew in a breath and looked at Shinzichuan in shock. Why do you call me a son of Gedale? The jade earring on Shinzichuan's right ear glinted. Haragu inclined his head and said, because by Cha split. Haragu had yet to finish his words when an arrow fired in secret pierced through the wind with a swoosh and stabbed into the carriage. Yen Haru, who had been too afraid to make a sound and who had been hanging in midair playing dead, promptly yelled, They are here! Fei Xing immediately yanked the curtains down and commanded, Get on the horses! The carriage charged into the darkness of the night under the escort of the imperial bodyguards, while Yen Haru was thrown back into the carriage. The downtown streets of Dunzhou were wide and spacious. The Yen clan had expanded it to facilitate the smooth passage of the various merchants' carriages. At present, the streets were bustling with activity, with carriages coming and going in never-ending streams. Yen Haru tripped all over the place as he put on his robe and said in a hurry, Head for the Prince of Jianqing's manor. I tore down the former site of the Prince of Jianqing's manor and reconstructed a private residence in its place. There are 100 or so compound guards in there. Fei Xing promptly turned the horses around. The glazed tiles of the Prince of Jianqing's manor had long been torn down. After Shun Wei's self-immolation, all that was left of this place was its dilapidated ruins. Yen Haru loved the place, so he had reconstructed it into a private residence modeled in the style of those in Kudu. A tall building with double-eaved roofs had been built within this residence, and if one were to stand on top of it, they would get a panoramic view of Dunzhou. Fei Xing carefully surveyed the manor before he entered. He found Yen Haru rather strange. The latter had actually built a wall of bricks on the outer layer and knocked down a hole in the wall to install bows and arrows, with the mechanism connected to the parapet. Looking at just how thick the wall was, it could even stand up to an assault from a stone catapult. As businessmen, we fear being targeted in the dark and stabbed in the back. There are plenty of unscrupulous people who would do these kind of asshole deeds. I cherish my life. It surely stands to reason for me to have a safe haven in Dunzhou, and I won't feel at ease if I don't construct an impregnable fortress. Yen Haru invited Shinzichuan upstairs. This place is known as Fuxian Peak. It's a tall one. Your lordship, please come with me upstairs to have some drinks and enjoy ourselves. We'll see how that silly fool Lei Jingzhe gets all distraught with anxiety and frustration outside. Fei Xing could not hold back from asking, Aren't you scared he'll fight his way in to hack your head off? Yen Haru turned his head back from atop the stairs and looked at Fei Xing with a brilliant smile. What do I have to fear? A real man isn't afraid of a big scar. At most, my head will roll, but I'd still be a hero again in 18 years. One Yen Haru might have been exceedingly flippant with his words, but he was genuinely unafraid. He was pertinent to the businesses of the merchants from the 2 prefectures of Zhongbua. So many people depended on him for their livelihood. Despite having suffered such a massive humiliation tonight, Lei Jingzhe would not dare to kill him for real, for Yen Heru still had Huzhou as his shield. In reality, Lei Jingzhe's relentless pursuit was directed at Haragu. This little brat was an extremely crafty one. Shen Zichuan guessed that the reason Lei Jingzhe and Haragu were embroiled in such a fierce fight with each other in Dunzhou was likely because Yen Heru had been adding fuel to the flame. His past support of Lei Changming failed to reap any results, and it was only due to Lei Changming's respect for him that he could retain the store in Dunzhou. If it had been anyone else, this piece of business would have been long gone. For this reason, he was apprehensive about the monopoly on power Lei Jingzhe's party possessed. As such, he secretly funded Haragu's batch of scorpions to let them mutually hold each other in check until they both eventually had to rely on the Yen clan. The maidservants entered in a single file and lit up the lights in successive order. Thick and heavy draperies were lifted, while pearl-white sheer fabrics were let down to take its place. There was even a small covered veranda hanging with climbing figs and devil's ivy, surrounded by a murmuring stream the width of an arm. An open-air pavilion was erected in the middle of it, adorned with a refined rock garden that sat at an angle. The entire sky of stars seemed to be within reach if one were to just gaze out into the distance from here, along with an unobstructed view of the lantern displays in Dunzhou. This building was built for the purpose of ascending high enough to appreciate the view. If you stand here and look far out into the east, you'll be able to marvel at the Chashire River, which mirrors a jade belt too in heaven and on earth. This is a magnificent view you cannot find anywhere else. Yen Heru leaned against the railings and said to Shun Zichuan, "It's impossible to leave Dunzhou for the time being. Your lordship can go ahead and stay here, and we can discuss business." Shun Zichuan's cloak fluttered in the wind as he held onto the railing and looked down. He could see Lei Jingzhe's forces coming through the street. "You sure are a dauntless one." Yen Heru flicked the beads on the golden abacus. "Money is king. Lei Jingzhe himself has to call me granddaddy. I have nothing to fear. On the other hand, your lordship will be in danger if the Zizhou garrison troops are really not coming." "I come and go silently," Shun Zichuan said. "It's easy for me to leave if I want to. Bai Cha is the reason you came to Dunzhou this time," Yen Heru said to Shun Zichuan with a smile. "Haragu knows everything. You almost got a glimpse of the whole story, so you must be burning with anxiety now, right? Bai Cha's exact relationship to the scorpions is something Haragu knows best. Your lordship, I'm sincere in discussing business with you. As long as you agree, Haragu will be at your disposal. If we join forces to get rid of Lei Jingzhe, occupy the territories in the north and east, and develop the trade route, the silver will come flowing in like water, no? What happened in Chazhou will be written off immediately. I will not blame you for Kai Yu's death." Shun Zichuan bent over to lean against the railing too and laugh. Yen Heru's smile gradually vanished, and he asked unhappily, "What are you laughing at?" "Lei Jingzhe came here today for Haragu. If you don't hand Haragu over, Lei Jingzhe will settle the score with you. You are now thinking of using a forfeited pawn to trick me into doing business with you. Such a good deal doesn't exist in this world." Shun Zichuan looked out at the far end of Dunzhou in the direction of Duanzhou. "The trade route between Huaizhou, Zizhou, and Chazhou belongs to me. If you want a share of the pie, you have to first convince me." Yen Heru fell silent for a moment as he faced the wide expanse of the night, then laughed again. "Is your lordship still trying to deceive me at such a juncture? Without your troops now, you are merely a trapped beast. I won't hand over Haragu, but I can hand you over. You plotted to butcher Lei Jingzhe tonight. Going by Lei Jingzhe's character, this feud is as good as already inked in blood. Even if he can tolerate you for a moment for the sake of money, he will never let you off in the future. Moreover, you've already shown your card that is Haragu tonight." Shun Zichuan tilted his chin up slightly to bathe in the breeze. "Even if Lei Jingzhe is willing to bury the hatchet with you, the same can't be said of the 12 tribes of Bianxia backing him. Haragu was not one man. He had also brought along a bunch of scorpions who were similarly living a vagabond life in Zhongbua. These people hid themselves all over the place, and most of them had defected from Gedale. Yen Haru had provided them with financial assistance in order to keep Lei Jingzhe in check, and there was no doubt that the 12 tribes of Biantia would be settling this score as well. "At least I won't die tonight," Yen Haru said softly. "Then let us just perish together." Shen Zichuan tapped his icy fingers on the railings. "Hand me over to Lei Jingzhe tonight. Once I die, I can wait for you down there in the underworld. After tonight, I have plenty of ways to leave Dunzhou." Yen Haru snorted childishly in a loud voice. "Then let me tell you this." Shen Zichuan looked at him out of the corner of his pitch-black eyes. "If I die, Dunzhou and Duanzhou will die with me. No one will remember Zhongbua's lost territories. Kudu is too preoccupied with its own affairs, and Libei and Qidong can't be in 2 places at once. This place is a wide-open strategic gateway of Dazhou that can provide the Biantia cavalry with direct access in. They did not launch an assault in the past 6 years because the granaries in Zhongbua had yet to be fattened up. The time is now ripe, and Dazhou is already torn asunder by disunity. Sooner or later, this place will become the territory of the Biantia people. Xiao Fangxi will not sit and do nothing. This place has a bearing on Libei's battlegrounds in the southeast." Yen Haru said quickly. "Qi Juin has a well-trained and powerful army too. You're just trying to scare me." Shen Zichuan, "Without you, Zhongbua will have just a few more random self-proclaimed kings. The overall situation won't change at all." "In that case," Shen Zichuan raised his eyebrows slightly, "what makes you go to such lengths to discuss with me?" "Oh shit." Yen Haru bemoaned to himself. To think he had been led by Shen Zichuan's words. As they spoke, they heard a thunderous noise beneath them. Yen Haru shifted his gaze over to look and could not help but freeze. "Why are there so many people? Ever since stepping foot into Dunzhou, I've been puzzled by a question. There is clearly a bridle path leading right to Duanzhou, so why did Lei Jingzhe still forego what is close at hand and seek what is far afield instead? Then, there is his proficient way of searching the goods in the city. My guess is that this isn't the first time he has been robbed. The people hiding here are the thorns in his side." Shen Zichuan smiled slightly. "Even I could guess that you are the one funding Haragu, so do you really think Lei Jingzhe won't be able to make the same guess? He came prepared this time. That invitation was indeed to lure a snake out of its hole, but the one who took the bait was you." The lanterns on the streets were knocked over as the sounds of horses' hooves flooded in from outside, while the cavalry with no end in sight resembled dark clouds that completely devoured the river of lights from view. The troops Lei Jingzhe had brought over had been hiding outside the city, all for the purpose of getting rid of the mortal malady that was Haragu once and for all. Fei Xing saw the Saker falcons in the night sky. He briskly walked around the railing and realized that those dark clouds were presently steamrolling across the entire city of Dunzhou. "He doesn't dare to kill me." Yen Haru involuntarily exposed his panic as he hugged his golden abacus to his bosom and took several steps back. Hezhou, the head cart 3 Lei Jingzhe brought along, crashed heavily into the front gates. Unable to withstand such a violent impact, the iron sheet-covered latch on the other end of the door let loose a shrill shriek in protest. Horses snorted and grunted urgently, while circling Saker falcons stirred up the overcast clouds. The starry sky earlier had dimmed, leaving only the wind to continue howling in never-ending torrents. There was no use for scheming in the face of a strong army. These iron hooves had no qualms trampling over the heart of Zhongbua once before. What's not to say they couldn't do it again this time? Chapter 174, Mad Dog. Chapter 174, Mad Dog. With Lei Jingzhe having opened up the Dunzhou armory, no matter how solid Yen Haru built this mansion to be, it could not stand up to a single blow in the face of military weapons built specifically for sieges. Those arrows simply could not penetrate through the shield of the head cart, one and the door latch broke from the impact of the crash. Before the crossbow arrows could be reloaded, the Biancha cavalry entered. Fei Xing stepped forward in a move to support Shen Zichuan and said in an urgent voice, "Master, let's evacuate from the back and find a way to leave the city under cover of the night. Lei Jingzhe wants to round up Harigu and his people in one fell swoop." Shen Zichuan stood against the wind. He meticulously prepared for this, as evident in his use of a massive force to besiege the city. He won't leave any openings. It's already too late to be thinking of leaving the city now. Fei Xing watched as the compound was surrounded. He knew escape was impossible tonight, but as he had made it clear before, he had to risk his life to ensure that Shen Zichuan remained safe and sound, so he clenched his blade and stood motionless at the side like a nail fixed in place beside Shen Zichuan. The imperial bodyguards behind him all looked as if they were about to come face to face with a formidable foe. For a moment the atmosphere was particularly somber. The crescent moon at present looked like a thread concealed away among the dark clouds. Heavy fog hung overhead in the sky, bearing down on them. There was already no stopping the destructive force in motion. Shen Zichuan was still leaning against the railing, letting his gaze roam to take in the lights in Dunzhou. This was the first time he got a clear look at Dunzhou. Fei Xing stood in silence. Together with the imperial bodyguards, he watched Shen Zichuan attentively amid the deafening sound of the melee below. Strangely enough, they were no longer nervous, even at such a critical juncture of life and death. Fei Xing had only wanted to follow under Xiao Qi's command in the past because Xiao Qie had the unprecedented spirit of a groundbreaking pioneer. On the day they rebelled and fled from Kudu, Fei Xing had done so willingly and wholeheartedly. But Xiao Qie refused to accept him, so he could only step back to work under Shen Zichuan instead. Shen Zichuan wasn't likable. His appearance made him a controversial figure who was the subject of condemnation in Kudu. Shen Wei was a threshold. Many people would rather stand on the outside to scrutinize him, as if the verdict of his life and death all lay in those sprays of spittle. When he left Zhaozi Temple, everyone treated him as a noble clan blade that had replaced Shen Wei, an imperial dog under the Empress Dowager's command. However, the subsequent happenings deviated far from everyone's expectations. In that struggle for power, he quietly and steadily rose his way to the top. By the time everyone realized it, he was already standing in the heart of the political storm. He did not seem to possess that imposing air of vim and vigor, and yet his thin and frail back was the protective barrier in all the times he stood in front. Even if the storm raged and left a trail of destruction in its wake, it would be a rainless picture of calm and silence behind him for as long as he remained standing. Fei Xing closed his eyes to clear his mind of distracting thoughts. His heart felt calm and at ease at present. This was a kind of tranquility that had no need for words of encouragement. He had abandoned Ji Lei and forsaken Han Qing. Whoever he followed had always been based on the opportunity availed to him at that time. All along, he had never been able to understand the trust Chen Yang and Gu Jin had in Xiao Qie, but at this very moment, as he stood in the wind and opened his eyes once again, he possessed that trust. Everyone in this world wants to be Xiao Qie, but there can be no other Shen Lanzhao. Horses' hooves broke through the doors beneath them, while dark clouds rolled overhead. Fei Xing, who had been plotting to seek personal gains by currying favors all his life, grabbed his blade with one hand and kicked over the wooden chair beside him to send it crashing into the Biancha cavalry at the stairway. He ripped his outer robe open and secured the blade in his palm, then lifted the wine on the table and said to the various imperial bodyguards, "Even if heaven and earth were to collapse today, we must ensure Master remains safe and unharmed. Here we are, chatting and drinking with a smile even as we are encircled by powerful troops. This is a sight and honor we have never had while serving the Emperor." Fei Xing raised his head back and gulped down the wine, letting it trickle down and soak through the front of his clothes. He smashed the bowl, then wiped his mouth and burst into wild laughter. This battle is going to make legends out of us men. Brothers, time to make a name for ourselves? Xiuchuan blades too all left their sheaths in unison, and booming laughter reverberated through the clouds. Blood splattered all over the stairway as more than a dozen imperial bodyguards climbed over the railings and brandished their blades to cut down the Biancha cavalry, who were swarming towards them with sweeping force. Heads rolled all over the narrow and cramped stairs. With every rise of his hand and fall of his blade, Fei Xing decisively and efficiently hacked away at his opponents' necks without the slightest hesitation. Lei Jingzhe did not dare to set the building on fire. He wanted to catch Yen Heru alive, so he could only force his way up the stairs in an attack. The imperial bodyguards were all at the top of their game tonight. Those scorpions, who were unshakable when they turned out in full force, were unable to swing their hammers freely after stepping onto the stairway, and this subsequently greatly reduced the strain on the imperial bodyguards. Unable to ascend the stairs, Lei Jingzhe sought out another way. Fuxian Peak towered over the double-eaved roofs like a crane standing head and shoulders among a flock of chickens, and so they used the cloud ladder. 3 Yen Heru watched as the Biancha cavalry swarmed up towards them en masse. Fuxian Peak seemed to be a relic pillar standing alone between heaven and earth. He retreated to Shun Zichuan's side, shivering from the wind. "Since you dared to enter the tiger's den, for then you must have prepared for it." Shun Zichuan did not answer. Yen Heru was about to say something further when a hand suddenly grasped the railing beside him, and a Biancha cavalryman climbed his way up. Without even thinking, Yen Heru raised his golden abacus and slammed it down on the Biancha cavalryman, knocking the latter out. But there were still several men following close behind the other man, and they made a sudden grab to hold up Yen Heru's abacus in place before flipping their way up. Yen Heru lived by the maxim that, as valuable as the abacus may be, life is worth even more, so he promptly let go of his hand, abandoning the abacus. He took several steps back, but tripped over the small table and toppled over to the ground. That cavalryman was a tall, strapping man, and he looked just like a mountain when he stood before Yen Heru. On seeing him lift his blade, Yen Heru hastened to yell, "Your lordship, save me! My dear Gidge! The price is always negotiable." A Saker falcon swooped past, and before the cavalryman could lift his blade, a figure suddenly leaped up from behind. Harigu came pouncing from the air, taking out the cavalryman in one slash. After he landed, he rolled on the ground and grabbed hold of Yen Heru. Yen Heru lifted his head, intending to gripe at Shun Zichuan for being such an unrighteous one. But before he could open his mouth, he saw a black shadow spring over the railing to land heavily on top of it. Harigu pressed Yen Heru's head down and bent over backward to dodge the iron hammer sweeping towards them. The man's bare upper body was just as muscularly sculpted as Jida, whom they had encountered a few days prior. The iron hammer swooshed past in midair, causing a break in the flow of the wind. When he stood up, Yen Heru had to raise his head to look at him. The scorpion tattoo took up his entire back. He rolled his shoulders as a warm-up, then proceeded to jump down the railing. Harigu pushed Yen Heru aside and fished out a pike dagger from the back of his waist. The two of them did not even bother with greetings as they immediately traded a flurry of blows with one another. There was nowhere for Yen Heru to hide in this chaos. He was used to a life of lavish luxury, and the martial arts he used to learn were merely all show but no substance. In any case, he had already forgotten all of it. Afraid of being pecked with the Saker falcons hovering overhead, Yen Heru crouched low and scrambled with both hands on the ground through any openings he could find amid the mayhem. He managed with great difficulty to make his way to the side, only to see a person squatting on the railing. Yen Heru lifted his gaze, and his eyes promptly curved into crescents as he revealed a smile and called out warmly, "Eldest nephew." Lei Jingzhe sneered and reached his arm out to grab him. Disregarding his dignity and image, Yen Heru rolled on the ground to one side like a slippery loach. He reached for the railing with the intention to climb up when he felt a grip on his collar. Thinking it to be Lei Jingzhe, he hurriedly turned his head to plead, Lei Gij, but it turned out to be Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan exerted force with his left hand and yanked Yen Heru off the railing before tossing him in front of him. Before Yen Heru had his chance to roll, Shen Zichuan pressed his foot against the back of his waist to make him kneel. Yen Heru was stuck between a rock and a hard place, with a wolf before him and a tiger behind him. He wanted to cry as he kneeled in the middle, but no tears came, so he put his palms together and said as though he was paying religious homage, I was merely jesting around with my dear Gidges. Put the loss this time on my account. Let's not brandish our weapons anymore. Say, the three of us should join forces and cooperate, then we'd be invincible in the world, agree? Lei Jingzhe motioned for Yen Heru to shut up. He leaped off the railing and stared at Shen Zichuan as he moved over with unhurried steps. After a while, he said, How have you been since we parted, Vice Commander? Without even waiting for Shen Zichuan to answer, he continued after coming to a stop. Guess I should call you Prefectural Lord now. Everyone was locked in battle near and far, and the sounds of tables and chairs being smashed resounded clearly in their ears. Thick gloomy clouds hung over their heads as both of them stood in the strong wind facing each other in a confrontation with Yen Heru between them. The raging wind in the distance surged and receded amid the backdrop of tens of thousands of lights in Dunzhou. Lei Jingzhe raised his hand to slap his nape and said in a mocking tone, I sure have excellent luck tonight. To think I could catch such a big fish from this sewer. What? There's no Xiao Qie to escort and protect you this time? Shen Zichuan raised a finger to remove the cloak on his shoulder and inclined his head to say with a smile, My husband is up to his neck in military affairs. It's inappropriate for him to go on a long journey these days. We can discuss it ourselves if there are any matters of concern. Lei Jingzhe's eyes gradually darkened to conceal a sly glint within. Did you come to Dunzhou? Oh, wrong. Did you return to Dunzhou to hold a memorial service for Shen Wei? I'm here on young Master Yan's invitation, Shen Zichuan said without batting an eyelid, to discuss a plan to kill you. Yen Heru's face blanched. He wanted to explain and defend himself when he met Lei Jingzhe's gaze, but on feeling the chill on his nape, he did not dare to speak up. Shen Zichuan is truly a ruthless one, he thought to himself. With just one word, the latter had severed his route of retreat. Whether or not he survived this night, Lei Jingzhe would no longer believe him. No wonder I could sense that the person who saved Yen Heru back in the restaurant was no ordinary talent. The expression in Lei Jingzhe's gaze was malevolent. I initially meant to be magnanimous and not lower myself to the level of a child. But I never expected him to be so malicious to invite you over to work out a scheme to kill me. He's a child at heart. Shen Zichuan shifted his foot away from Yen Heru. He doesn't know when to stop pushing it and inevitably ends up angering you. It's rather embarrassing. You have been colluding in secret for a long time. As expected, Lei Jingzhe fell for the trap and contemplated it. No wonder I couldn't find the supply wagons this time. But you one-upped him tonight, Shen Zichuan said as if he conceded defeat. His eyes followed Lei Jingzhe. I can switch allegiances, seeing how it's a matter of life and death now. Lei Jingzhe feared Shen Zichuan. He knew Shen Zichuan was the most proficient in this kind of offensive and defensive warfare. The moment he fell for Shen Zichuan's words, he would be irrevocably doomed. So Lei Jingzhe lowered his arms and sneered. Xiao Qie ruined my base on Mount Luo. This is a score that can't be forgotten. If you kill Yen Heru tonight, you will completely sever all your contacts and dealings with Hezhou. But occupying both the prefectures of Dunzhou and Duanzhou means that you have to sustain the grains and military expenses alone in the future. Shen Zichuan attempted to coax him. Xizhou's granaries are currently in abundance of grains. I can give you a helping hand. Lei Jingzhe threw his head back and roared with laughter. Suddenly, he spoke, Since you have been colluding with Yen Heru for a long time, then you must have seen Herigu. My guess is that you came to Tsizhou this time to take in these traitors by capitalizing on Bai Cha's name and reputation, right? Looks like the game is as good as lost for me tonight. I can't hide it from you. Shen Zichuan sighed with a pang of regret. That's right. I came here this time for precisely this matter. Lei Jingzhe, we are all sons of Gedale. When it really comes down to it, we are all fellow brothers too. So why draw our swords on each other? As long as you can hack off Xiao Qia's head, we can be brothers. Lei Jingzhe still bore a grudge against Xiao Qia. He said in a frosty tone, "You are deceiving me with such words only because you saw how heavily besieged the city is now and you know you can't escape death. Are you really going to kill me? Setting an enemy free is like letting a tiger return to its mountain. It will set the stage for future calamities." Lei Jingzhe said, "You took 2 months to devour Tsizhou and Chazhou and take Zhougui and Luomu under your command. I was initially worried you would become the dominant power in Zhongbua in the future the longer you live, and by then, it would be hard to remove you. I didn't expect you to deliver yourself to my doorstep. No matter how you try to convince me with your glib tongue and honeyed words, my killing you is a foregone conclusion." The wind flooded into Shen Zichuan's sleeves, sending it billowing and revealing his wrist bone. The bandage on his right hand was visible as he gripped the blue handkerchief between his fingers. He covered his mouth and coughed as though he could not bear the cold on this tower. After the coughing stopped, he said, "Can't you give me a way out on account of the name Bai Cha?" As soon as the words left his mouth, it clicked in Lei Jingzhe's mind, and he promptly bellowed, "You deceived me. You don't know the specifics of the scorpions at all." With that, his fist went sailing through the wind right towards Shen Zichuan's face. Shen Zichuan had long been on his guard, and he slid aside to dodge the punch. On missing his target, Lei Jingzhe did not retract his fist but made use of the momentum to grab Shen Zichuan by the arm. White robe fluttered gently in the wind as Shen Zichuan moved away with elegant grace, causing Lei Jingzhe to turn up empty-handed once again. Lei Jingzhe squatted next and swept his leg out in a circle, and Shen Zichuan sprang back against that wave of strong wind to land on the railing. The sound of killing beneath them boiled over like a seething cauldron. Lei Jingzhe was determined to send Shen Zichuan to his death tonight. On seeing Shen Zichuan standing perilously on the edge, he grabbed his hammer and sent it swinging into the wind with the intent to force Shen Zichuan off the tower. Shen Zichuan balanced himself steadily on the railing. The strong wind roared behind him, sending his sleeves billowing like a swan goose 5 by the railing. His right hand remained still. He was already in a disadvantaged position. Deciding that a psychological offensive was the best tactic, Lei Jingzhe said in between movements, "Well, then, Shen Zichuan, don't you want to know Bai Cha's relationship to the scorpions? I will tell you tonight." He soared into the air and somersaulted onto the railing, where he followed close in Shen Zichuan's footsteps and attempted to force Shen Zichuan into the corner. Bai Cha was a whore in a brothel in Duanzhou who worked specifically for the Liaoying tribe. She was a dog amur planted beside Shen Wei. She was a needle Biantia hid in Zhongbua. Shen Zichuan seemed to lose his balance as he teetered at the edge for a bit. His sleeves suddenly danced backward. Fei Xing, who was deep among the horde of people, could not help but panic when he saw this sight in his peripheral vision. "Master!" However, in the next moment, Shen Zichuan braced himself against the wind and swung back to stabilize himself. On seeing this, Lei Jingzhe struck out at him suddenly, forcing Shen Zichuan to retreat in order to evade the blow again. He continued speaking, "Don't you think you're really a wretched one? Being Shen Wei's son caused you so much physical and mental suffering. I shall pull you out of this abyss of misery. Shen Zichuan, you're a bastard child of Biantia." Bai Cha was a promiscuous woman of loose morals. Lei Jingzhe felt the impact at the side of his neck, and this blow nearly made him bite off his tongue. He hurriedly took a few steps back and held himself steady at this high altitude, then turned his head to the side and spat out the blood from the blow Shen Zichuan had dealt him with. Shen Zichuan had his left hand lifted in a martial arts stance, his eyes freezing over with frostiness. His complexion looked particularly pale under this faint veil of moonlight, as if he was a piece of cold, bloodless jade. Slowly, he warned, "Watch your tongue." Lei Jingzhe threw his hammer aside and gradually put some distance between them. He said in a low voice, "Every word I say is the truth." He continued with a pitying gaze, "You're really the world's most pitiful child. Do you know how Bai Cha died? Shen Wei found out her real identity, then strangled her to death with his very own hands. You were born of abhorrence. Why did Shen Wei raise you? Did you think you were regaining lost grounds when you crawled your way out of the Chashire sinkhole and returned to Zhongbua after experiencing all that hatred and sorrows?" He let out a dreary laugh and said cruelly, "You made it all out to be so incredibly touching, but you didn't expect it, did you? No one will accept you for how you are. If Li Bei were to find out who Bai Cha is, Shao Qia's blade would turn on you." A jolt suddenly vibrated through the railing. At the same instant Shen Zichuan sprang. Lei Jingzhe crossed his arms before him to block the blow. The kick nearly made him lean over backward. With both of them locked in fierce combat, Yen Haru did not dare to remain close by and scrambled his way to the other end. Lei Jingzhe nearly could not hold his own against the blows, and as he retreated to evade the blows, he scraped against the wooden frame for vines, knocking it over along with the glazed lamps nearby. Flames pounced onto the woolen carpet, setting it ablaze in the blink of an eye. Lei Jingzhe was sure that Shen Zichuan had already lost his measure of control. As both of them duked it out on the railing, the flames behind them intensified. Fei Xing was all bathed in blood from the killing. He flipped out of the stairway and shouted, "Master, it's on fire. It's inadvisable to remain here for long." Lei Jingzhe felt a gush of wind at his back, and he spared whatever remaining strength he had to dodge the imperial bodyguards. "Dunzhou is my territory tonight. You have no way out of here alive even if you fight to the death." In the midst of his proclamation, Lei Jingzhe saw White Sleeves rushing right towards him with a move so sudden it caught him off guard and caused him to stumble. Shen Zichuan grabbed Lei Jingzhe by his collar, and in this heart-stopping moment, Lei Jingzhe got a clear look at Shen Zichuan's face. Even before Fei Xing could lend a hand, the sound of fabric tearing rang out, and in a flash, a feather-like white figure plunged down together with Lei Jingzhe. Fei Xing was seized with terror as he made a sudden grab for him with a lightning move of his hand, but his hand merely brushed past the corner of Lei Jingzhe's clothes. Panic-stricken, he cried out in a trembling voice, "Master!" The instant Lei Jingzhe plummeted down, he came to the conclusion that Shen Zichuan was gambling on his life with him. During the drop, he swiftly stretched out his right hand. His back slammed into the upturned eaves on Fuxian Peak. At the same time the corner broke off from the impact, he grabbed hold of the eaves and hung on, his feet swinging in the empty air. The blazing flames looked as though they were engulfing the world, and in spite of himself, Lei Jingzhe broke out in a sweat. Lei Jingzhe did not dare to be negligent. His right hand was burning with pain as he attempted to climb up the damaged eaves onto the protruding tiles. But Shen Zichuan had already climbed up from the other end. He stepped down on Lei Jingzhe's raised hand, and several tiles tumbled off all at once and smashed into smithereens below. Shaken, Lei Jingzhe spat out the blood in his mouth in the wind. "Fuck!" Shen Zichuan looked down at Lei Jingzhe, his badly torn sleeves revealing his right hand while towering flames blazed behind him. He removed the bandage and threw away the steel needle that had been secured with it, then clenched his 5 pale fingers into a fist to test his strength. Lei Jingzhe's fingers were hurting from being stepped on. He had pulled the muscles on his arm earlier, and right now, he was hanging on for dear life with all his might, his feet stepping in empty air as he forced himself to cling on to the damaged eaves. He saw that steel needle fall before his very eyes. "Even if you kill me, you won't survive this." Lei Jingzhe looked up and squeezed out a laugh. You're too pitiful. You've been molded into a monster. After tonight, Zhongbo will be your nightmare. You will toss and turn night after night, and you will be on tenterhooks day after day. The land under your feet. Shen Zichuan squatted down. The light of the flames made a clean sweep of his gloominess and pallor, replacing it with an exotic allure and a bloodthirsty ruthlessness. He let out a quiet laugh. How very naive of you. Lei Jingzhe's throat bobbed. He did not understand why. A strained gasp escaped as Shen Zichuan's right hand clutched his throat tightly. Never had he imagined that the seemingly frail and sickly Shen Zichuan would have such great strength. Shen Zichuan tightened his grip, using Lei Jingzhe's momentum in climbing up to haul him up some. As he watched Lei Jingzhe's face flush red, he said in a soft voice, "You are really a hilarious one, Lei Jingzhe. Why would you think that Bai Cha is enough to sway me?" Unable to catch his breath, Lei Jingzhe's eyes darted all over as fear engulfed him whole. Shen Zichuan scrutinized him and said kindly, "I came to Dunzhou for the specific purpose of capturing you." Lei Jingzhe's breathing hitched in his throat. "You did me a great favor." Shen Zichuan turned his eyes to look at Dunzhou. "I want to annex both the prefectures of Dunzhou and Duanzhou, but I didn't dare to make a move because of Qi Juin. All I could do was to make use of King Yi of Fanzhou as a cover. You could have lived a little longer. If you hadn't brought the Bianxia people over this time, I might have had to wait a year or two, or even longer, to find an opportunity, but you brought the Bianxia cavalry." The sparks crackled and spluttered. "Now I have enough reason to deploy troops to Dunzhou." Shen Zichuan shifted his gaze back to Lei Jingzhe's face. "Thanks to you for chatting with me for this long so that I could buy time for the Zizhou garrison troops." Lei Jingzhe could not believe it. How could Shen Zichuan have plotted his moves to such an extent and anticipated every step Lei Jingzhe himself would take? He raised his head. The world before him was already a blur. With some difficulty, he gasped, "You U.S. Scorpion, regardless of who my parents are." Shen Zichuan turned his head to the side and whispered into his ear, "I am Shen Zichuan. Whether your word is the truth or a lie is of no significance to me at all. I am my own nightmare." The land under his feet? Zhongbo could not tie down Shen Zichuan at all. He was not as attached to his native land as Xiao Qie was. On the day he fell into the Chaucer sinkhole, he became a man without a hometown. Ever since then, he severed all attachment he held towards the land. He could never gallop in the grasslands. His wings were born out of the darkness of the night. If Xiao Qie was Hongyan Mountains, then Shen Zichuan was the frigid wind coursing through the territories of Zhongbo. Shenwei, Bai Cha. He did not care for them at all. The two fingers on his right hand made a noise of protest, but Shen Zichuan could no longer feel the pain. He gripped Lei Jingzhe's throat just like how he had choked Ji Lei a year ago. This made it clear to all that he was no longer trapped under the control of others. Perhaps Lei Jingzhe was right. All these years of suffering and hatred had molded him into a monster. When Qi Hualien died as well in that heavy downpour, Shen Zichuan completely forsook all of those obsolete conventions. He would no longer be anyone's prisoner. He loved Xiao Qie, and he still had Ji Gang. He could not imagine a day when Xiao Qie and Ji Gang would become a thing of the past, transformed into pain he had no remedy for. He had enough of enduring it in silence. He was fed up of being chained. He wanted to tear apart not just this world, but also all the shackles imposed on him in the past. Lei Jingzhe could hardly hang on anymore. He was finally able to raise his hands to grab Shen Zichuan's arm, and it was at this moment he remembered the rumors in Kudu. "Mad, mad," Lei Jingzhe squeezed the words out. The angry flames that stretched like a fiery dragon roared among the double-eaved roofs and pavilion, and the building let loose a series of dangerous-sounding noises amidst the burning. Broken wood went smashing with a thunderous crash, and the tiles under their feet followed suit and slid off. Fuxian Peak, which Yan Heru had spent big bucks to construct, was in the process of collapsing. The damaged eaves cracked apart again, as if it could not bear the weight of two people. It was here Shen Zichuan stood, yet he remembered the abyss in his dream. He had always stood at the brink of the abyss without taking that one step forward, because he did not know what kind of change that one step would usher in. But then, he heard the sound of horses' hooves. That was the wind that came from Libei. Shen Zichuan released his hand. At that very instant the eaves collapsed. Shen Zichuan strode a step out. His white robe went fluttering in the wind as he plunged down like a bird with its wings folded. The wind swept past his ears. He felt as if he had experienced a dream. Still, stagnant waters lay at the bottom of the abyss, and it was here Shen Zichuan fell and stirred up waves of ripples. But the breathing in his ear was so intense. A vibrant life force brimming with vitality dispelled the darkness as strong arms held Shen Zichuan tight. In that split second, the lifeless waters seemed to have brushed off its extraneous dust to metamorphose into Xiao Qia's chest. Xiao Qia had caught hold of him. Chapter 175. Kitten. Chapter 175. Kitten Fuxian Peak was in the midst of collapsing, and Xiao Qia's soul was about to take leave of his body at the exact moment he looked up. He grabbed onto the eaves with an arm and stepped on somebody's head to clamber up the double-eaved roof, then run for what his life was worth. He caught Shen Zichuan in his arms as he leaped, and the impact careened him off course. He immediately covered Shen Zichuan with his arms as his back struck heavily against the ridge of the roof, causing the tiles to topple off. Chen Yang reined in his horse and brandished his whip to point towards the eaves as he shouted urgently, "Lao Hu, catch them!" Xiao Qia panted heavily as his sore arms braced his body. Sweat trickled along his neck. As the falling objects went crashing, he haphazardly brushed aside the hair on Shen Zichuan's cheek with his trembling fingers and confirmed that Shen Zichuan was still gasping for breath. He let loose a vague curse and held Shen Zichuan so tightly with such force that Shen Zichuan coughed intermittently amid the smoke and dust. Tantai, who had already chased all the way to the front of the building. He released Lang Tao Shuejin's reins and shouted, "Master!" Xiao Qia stepped on the tiles and leaped down. Gu Jin wanted to give him a helping hand, but Xiao Qia raised his arm to block the former, unwilling to hand Shen Zichuan over to anyone else. As he mounted his horse, Xiao Qia took the cloak from Chen Yang and covered Shen Zichuan with it. The contours of Xiao Qia's side profile were cold and hard. He patted Tantai Hu on the back with his freed hand, making Tantai Hu stick out his chest, then said in a cold voice, "This place was your elder brother's battlefield." Tantai Hu wiped away the blood on his cheek in silence. With eyes grave and solemn, Xiao Qia said, "Tantai Hu, time to go home." Once again, the Prince of Jianxing's manor was burned and razed to the ground. Flames accompanied the sound of killing as the fire blazed until dawn. The dark red blood on the downtown streets of Dunzhou had converged into a trickling stream. Meanwhile, the commoners all hid themselves at home, not daring to even sneak a peek. At the third quarter of the hour of Qin, the Zizhou garrison troops and imperial army started to clean up the battlefield. They dragged the corpses to an open, flat area to be disposed of at a later time. Tantai Hu was presently having his meal. He had just returned from the battlefield, and without even washing his face, he squatted with the guards on the veranda to gobble down his food. Chen Yang called for the chef in the Yen clan's pleasure house to prepare meals for the soldiers of the garrison troops and imperial army, who were all famished after having marched through the night and fighting until the break of day. Street fights are still the most thrilling. Tantai Hu wiped his mouth. Field operations are thrilling too, but not nearly as thrilling. Master has the foresight. Gu Jin bit down on a steamed bun before continuing, not to get the imperial army to put on armor. Otherwise we would have suffered from those hammers last night. The curtains of the main hall remained down all the time they rested up here. Chen Yang was a little worried. Clutching at the register of names, he questioned Ding Tao, "Why did you let young master go up that tower? You didn't even go with him." Ding Tao hung his head down, not daring to say a word. Fei Xing and several others who had been injured had hastily bandaged their wounds, and their upper garments were uncovered as they all kneeled in the courtyard and waited to be reprimanded. However, the imperial bodyguards put up a beautiful defense last night. They had not allowed Lei Jingzhe to force his way up from the stairs. 2 of their own had died. As Fei Xing had shouted, they had made a name for themselves with this one battle. No one could belittle them in the future. They had real capabilities to speak of, and they could hold their heads high even when they stood before the guards from Libei, for they were no less inferior. Kong Ling stood in the hall and let his sleeves fall as he waited deferentially at the side. He knew Xiao Qie was feeding Shen Zichuan medicine when he heard the clinks of the porcelain bowl in the inner chamber. After a while, the maidservant came out with the bowl and curtsied to Kong Ling before leaving the room. Xiao Qie lifted the curtain and stepped out. He wiped his hands with a handkerchief and said to Kong Ling, "It's nothing serious." He hurt his hand. Last time, it was his left hand and now it's his right hand. In any case, he's taking turns to injure them. Sooner or later, he's going to be the death of me. Kong Ling remained calm and unruffled as he lowered his head and listened. He knew the words were not meant for him. The inner chamber was not soundproof, and the way Xiao Qie mentioned it so casually made the man lying within turn over soundlessly. Xiao Qie set the handkerchief to one side, then made way and gestured for Kong Ling to enter. Once Kong Ling lifted the curtains and went in, he strode out of the door to stand under the eaves and whistled to the guards. "Let Gu Jin dispose of the corpses. Settle it by tonight at the latest. Get whatever cleansing agents needed like vinegar and water from the Yen clan." Xiao Qie cast a glance at the weather. "While it's not that hot in autumn, I noticed last night that the public ditches in Danzhou are all clogged as well. It's all too easy for an epidemic to start if they aren't unclogged. Keep an eye on it." Danzhou had no yamen to manage its affairs, and its network of public ditches was all in a mess. There were plenty of people who built their houses over the ditches, and the cloggage was far worse than it had been in Kudu. It was the reason for the blood pooling into puddles this morning instead of flowing freely like a river. One autumn was not as hot as summer, but it was too dry. The fire had raged for so long last night partially because the houses in the residential district were all clustered together, eaves to eave. As he stood at the doorway and gave his instructions, Shen Zichuan was also discussing affairs with Kong Ling in the inner chamber. Kong Ling sat on the small chair by the side of the bed and said, "Once we received your lordship's letter in Xizhou, we immediately began to check the garrison troops. Yuanzhua wanted the garrison troops to leave the city right at once and head east to wait for the imperial army at the southern border of the Bianbo camp. He said if the imperial army came, they could head south as one. If not, they should remain there and wait." He smiled when he spoke to this point. "I initially objected to it, because your lordship instructed us in the letter not to act arbitrarily without orders. It's a good thing Yuanzhua insisted." Shen Zichuan leaned partially against the pillow and read the letter Kong Ling brought along. Yuanzhua understood the message behind that letter. Shen Zichuan, unable to write a letter then, had to orally dictate many points for inclusion in the letter. At that time, there were still captured bandits around the horse carriage, and many among them were former subordinates of Luer. What's more, Luer was Lei Jingzhe's messenger. Shen Zichuan could not trust all these people, so when he issued his command to Xizhou, he said, "Do not act arbitrarily without orders." But then, he followed up right after with the order to head for Danzhou. He was playing with words here, and Yao Wenyu got the hint right at once. Your lordship is circumspect and far-sighted. A few days back when we were discussing Danzhou, we still thought we would only be able to come after spring next year. Who would have expected your lordship to have already worked out the appropriate strategy? Kong Ling said. It was a coincidence this time. Shen Zichuan was clear-headed. When I seized those supply wagons, I only knew that there were 400 scorpions still in Danzhou. I gave Cizhou a hint to deploy troops initially because I wanted to use this reason to let the garrison troops probe into just how deep the waters in Dunzhou run. It would have been enough to capture Lei Jingzhe alive. But who knew? He even brought along more than 10,000 cavalrymen and delivered them right into my hands. During their discussion back in Cizhou, they had agreed to first keep King Yi's small imperial court in Fanzhou under control before attempting to obtain Dunzhou. This was because King Yi could obstruct Qi Zhuyin of Qidong on Shen Zichuan's behalf. Shen Zichuan now had the two prefectures of Cizhou and Chazhou in his hands, and he relied on the trade route to rise to power. In Zhongbua, he could only be considered the master of a small plot of land. The various prefectures of Dunzhou, Duanzhou, Fanzhou, and Dengzhou to the east all had their own masters. If Shen Zichuan wanted to remove them from the equation, he needed a logical reason. Otherwise, Qi Zhuyin would have a reason to launch an assault on him the moment he deployed his troop. In all probability, Lei Jingzhe did not expect himself to come for the sole reason of eliminating Harigu, only to end up being the perfect reason for Shen Zichuan to attack Dunzhou. But this also illustrated one thing from the side, and that was Lei Jingzhe had been around Duanzhou for so long that he had already forgotten that Zhongbua was still land that was part of Dazhou. It was brazen and dauntless of him to lead 10,000 cavalrymen deep into Dunzhou. He thought nothing of King Yi of Fanzhou and Dengzhou at all, and even less of Shen Zichuan of Cizhou. Kong Ling initially still had other matters to report, but then he heard the wind starting to rise outside the window. In no time at all, it started to drizzle. He hurriedly stood up and closed the windows for Shen Zichuan. "This has truly been a dangerous trip for your lordship. Some words ought to have been conveyed to you by Yuanzhua himself, but it is inconvenient for him to travel long distance, so I shall be so bold as to do it on his behalf." Shen Zichuan seemed to know what Kong Ling was going to say. He set the letter on the blanket and looked at Kong Ling. Kong Ling took 2 steps and said, "As the saying goes, a wise man does not put himself in harm's way. For your lordship to repeatedly place yourself in dangerous situations is simply not appropriate. The development of Cizhou's foundation is still in its fledgling stage, and the system for the registration of Chazhou's citizens has yet to be perfected. Libei's mutual trade market has not started either. Your lordship is the head of the household. In doing this, you are hanging in the balance the loyalty of all those who stand behind you." Kong Ling's meaning could not be any clearer. Now that Shen Zichuan was the prefectural lord, he had in his hands the lifeblood of the 2 prefectures of Cizhou and Chazhou, along with the tiger that was Li Bei crouching behind him. As the saying goes, embarking on a great undertaking is only the tip of the iceberg. There would be many affairs in the future where he would be the one holding the sole decision-making power. Nothing untoward must happen to him. Shen Zichuan's countenance was pleasant as he bowed slightly towards Kong Ling. "Mr. is right to lecture me. I will sincerely reflect on it and not take any unnecessary risks again." After Kong Ling had taken his leave, Shen Zichuan folded up the letter and put it away on the small table at the head of the bed. His right hand had been bandaged again. His 2 fingers had been bent out of shape from the pressure he inflicted on them, and when the physician set his fingers right earlier, he had sweated profusely. Even now, he was still in pain. Rain poured outside, as though it were cleansing the streets on behalf of Dunzhou. There were many matters that Shen Zichuan had yet to attend to, but he was presently leaning back against the pillow. He had no wish to see anyone except for Xiao Qie, but Xiao Qie did not come in even after he waited for a little over an hour. Eventually, he ended up drifting to sleep. The next time Shen Zichuan woke up, he was woken by the heat. He had already been shifted further into the bed. The sky was murky and bleak, accompanied by the urgent howls of wind and rain. He cocked his head to see Xiao Qie sitting by the outer edge of the bed, reading a letter by the faint candlelight. The instant Shen Zichuan saw Xiao Qie, he started to ache all over. He was too lazy to move, having just woken up, so he clung dazedly to the pillow for a while. His foot under the blanket slid over to make light contact with Xiao Qia's calf. Xiao Qia ignored him. Shen Zichuan propped himself up to look over at the letter, then explained in a hoarse voice, "It's from Yuanjua. I have to reply back to him later to get Gao Zhongxiong to write up a notice immediately. We have to make it clear to Qidong that Xizhou deployed its troops this time to fight the Bianxia cavalry." Xiao Qia looked at him out of the corner of his eyes, then folded the letter and tossed it to the side. He said nothing. Shen Zichuan took his chance to lie on Xiao Qia's arm and buried his head. "Soon. I'll return to Xizhou with you in a few days." Xiao Qia lowered his eyes to stare at Shen Zichuan. "Let's see. You broke your fingers and you jumped off a building. Ji Gangshifu is going to have to lash me until the horsewhip breaks." Shen Zichuan said in a muted voice, "Don't." Xiao Qia fell silent for a moment. Shen Zichuan nuzzled his face against Xiao Qia's arm and called out softly, "Ayi." Xiao Qia felt that Shen Zichuan really deserved a spanking. He was determined not to fall for it this time, so he raised his other hand to grab the back of Shen Zichuan's collar and lifted him over to the side. "Who's Ayi?" "No such person," Shen Zichuan said. Xiao Qia simply covered Shen Zichuan with the blanket, then blew out the candle flame. Without even embracing him, he turned his back and lay down, still fully clothed. He still remembered that feeling when he broke into a dash. He had really gone all out then, as if his life depended on it. He would not care to look even if there had been a mountain of swords and a sea of flames before him. He was about to die from all those stabs Shen Zichuan was dishing out to his heart. Shen Zichuan peeled off the blanket and bumped against Xiao Qia's back all the way up to his shoulder. He stuck to Xiao Qia's temple and said, "I can't sleep if you aren't hugging me." Xiao Qia lay flat and grabbed Shen Zichuan around his waist to drag him onto his body. Shen Zichuan looked at him, and he looked at Shen Zichuan. However, he would not release his grip and instead secured Shen Zichuan in this position so that Shen Zichuan could not move. "Go ahead and sleep," Xiao Qia said. "This position is rather cramped." Shen Zichuan motioned to his chest with his eyes. "It's still pounding. Isn't that nice?" Xiao Qia said with a shadow of a smile. "Mine has been pounding all this time." Shen Zichuan raised his palm over Xiao Qia's chest and rubbed it. Xiao Qia lifted him up high and said, "No touching. I'm angry." Shen Zichuan was like a downtrodden cat that had fallen into the water as Xiao Qia held him in his hands while he brandished his paws to scratch at Xiao Qia's chest. So light yet so ticklish. So devilish yet so pampered. The scratches made even Xiao Qia's teeth itch. Look at those expressive, lazy eyes. He was clearly an emboldened one, brazenly acting as if nothing that happened was of his own doing. Xiao Qia was miffed, but those scratches wore his bad temper down into nothingness. The way Shen Zichuan looked and acted now could not be found anywhere else, for it was the outcome of being much too indulged and spoiled in Xiao Qia's arms. Xiao Qia knew this very well, but he did not intend to let Shen Zichuan get away with it unpunished. "This a scrub you're giving me?" Xiao Qia said mercilessly. "It's been 2 days since I last bathed."